Chapter 1643. The battle between Glorious Light and Beidou was still in a stalemate. Glorious Light felt that he could no longer complete the accumulation of 1,000 swords and one thunder, which he was most confident in. If he forced himself to do it, it would take several months for him to condense enough to deal a fatal blow to his opponent. His opponent's understanding of the Tao was not inferior to his, which made it impossible for him to use his Tao of lightning. He was a decisive person. He would give up when he had to and never hold back. A battle between cultivators was not about using all of one's skills, as long as it was useful, as long as it could kill. Other than the secret sword of lightning, he had other methods. For example, he would use all of his mid-range and long-range attacks to force his opponent to show his cards. Since he no longer used the secret sword of lightning and no longer had to deliberately accumulate thunderclouds, he could relatively put all of his energy into purely mid-range attacks. Coupled with the superior sword light division, the advantage was gradually becoming more obvious. Gathering the 5 elements, yin-yang destruction technique, reincarnation god slaying technique, world's in-near hand sword, power sword, large sword circle, small sword circle. He had been a monarch for more than 1,000 years. He was extremely talented in the Tao of swords, and he worked even harder. He spent almost all of his time on swordsmanship, ignoring everything else. After 1,000 years, his achievements in swordsmanship were not small. All of his hard work had finally given him the upper hand when he met his match. He rarely used tactics that included movement techniques, because it would give his opponent an opportunity to take advantage of. Therefore, he did not use the heaven-measuring sword ruler to create problems. He just blindly moved, forcing his opponent to use close combat. Mid-range attacks, his opponent was inferior to him. Mid-range attacks, as long as his opponent dared to come close, he could immediately seize the opportunity to stun them. This was a very familiar system in Xuanyuan sword vein. It was especially effective against swordsmen or physique cultivators who were good at close combat. It was a set that had already formed a system. This set was very effective, at least for now. When Beidou was gradually being suppressed in the mid-range, the pressure was on him. Should he change? How should he change? What kind of tactics could achieve the best results? Beidou sighed in his heart. He felt that the origin world was vast, and the sword vein was indeed unique. At least in mid-range, even his self-proclaimed #1 sword tomb could not compare. However, the sword catacombs philosophy was that the sword was a melee weapon. They believed that focusing their energy on mid-range and long-range attacks had deviated from the true essence of the sword. Therefore, it wasn't that they couldn't flaunt their might in the mid-range and long-range teams. Rather, it was that they disdained to do so. This was a difference in ideology. Now, it was time to prove whose concept was more in line with the essence of the sword. The pressure was indeed a bit too much, and it was a bit unbearable. Beidou had finally tested out the abilities of Xuanyuan's sword vein. Without any hesitation, the sword dragon charged towards the radiant light like a spinning cage. Light luminary was already used to his attacks. He moved swiftly. Layers of sword river intercepted him. All kinds of sword attacks came pouring down. Different Tao realms rotated, testing the adaptability of both parties. Such attacks could never get close to him. But this time, the sword dragon was different. It did not curl up into a ball, but shot out rapidly. Although the tens of thousands of sword lights seemed insignificant compared to the hundreds of thousands of sword lights of the radiance of light, it was still fatal. What was condensed was the essence, and with the same strength as him, the pressure brought by the tens of thousands of sword lights was not to be underestimated. Light luminary was ready for close combat in an instant. He even pulled out his longsword, because he noticed that Beidou's figure was no longer in the midst of the sword dragon. What kind of close combat technique was he using? He was not sure, because this was a completely unfamiliar sword vein orthodoxy. But there was one thing he knew: it could never be separated from the Tao of space. Swinging his sword left and right. This was one of Xuanyuan's scabbard's uses of space, originated from Xuanyuan's greatest figure, the Crow ancestor. As he swung his sword, the surrounding space changed subtly. This was a different use of space. It did not completely isolate the Tao of space, as that would consume too much mana and soul, and it would be easily detected by the opponent. The biggest use of this spatial technique was to form layers of unstable spatial walls around him. Once someone tried to approach him using spatial techniques, they would first be detected by the layers of thin spatial walls, exposing his position. The remaining problem was, of course, the swordsman trusted the long sword in his hand more. It had a very similar name to the crow ancestor, poke head and peak. It meant that when the opponent was about to attack, there would be a moment of stiffness. This was the meaning of poke head and peak. With a slash of the sword, everything would be fine. However, the layers of thin spatial walls were already set up, and there was no reaction. On the contrary, the tens of thousands of sword lights from Beidou rushed towards him. These were indeed sword lights, and the swordsman was not wrapped in them. Then, where did Beidou go? Light Luminary's willpower was firm, and he did not make any wild guesses, nor did he change his plan easily. The sword rivers roared down and collided with the sword dragons, annihilating them one by one. But this time, Beidou had obviously added a lot of power to the sword dragons, and they were still as sharp as ever. They did not retreat in the slightest. Instead, Light Luminary stood his ground. He had rich battle experience, and his willpower was exceptionally firm. He would not change his decision so easily like Takizawa. He was right here, surrounded by poke head and peak. He wanted to see what method Beidou was going to use to get close to him. Everything happened in the span of a few breaths. Under the obstruction of the sword rivers, most of the flying swords were intercepted. Finally, only one flying sword was left, and it was only a few hundred feet away from Light Luminary. Just as it was about to be drowned by the sword rivers, this flying sword suddenly underwent an unexpected change. The flying sword trembled, and tens of thousands of sword lights appeared out of thin air, with the same sharpness and the same determination. Light Luminary immediately understood. Beidou was not in a different dimension, and he would not barge in through peak head and peak. This bastard was basically something like a sword spirit. He was the sword, and the sword was him. He would not be stiff. He also did not need to use a sword technique like the heaven-measuring sword ruler. His approach was direct and simple. When the sword arrived, the person would arrive. Light Luminary understood, but he did not have time to react. Close to a few hundred feet, and with such a short distance, he would not turn around and leave his back exposed to the enemy. A real Xianyuan swordsman would only have one choice at this time, and that was to face the challenge head-on, a gamble of life and death. When Light Luminary swung his long sword, it met Beidou's sword hair head-on. With a loud clang, both sides were swung apart. Following that, Beidou's hands and legs turned into dozens of long swords, revolving around Light Luminary and attacking him. Light Luminary turned around and reacted quickly. He immediately rotated his body, and the long sword in his hand danced in an airtight manner. With a series of explosions, the two swords clashed more than 10 times in a breath. No matter how dense Light Luminary's long sword was, how could it compare to the dozens of long swords that Beidou had turned into? In the blink of an eye, his body was already injured in several places. What was even worse was that the long sword in his hand couldn't withstand such intense collisions and broke after a single round. If it was another opponent, he would still have time to take out countless backup swords from his storage ring. But now that he was so close to his opponent, how could he have the time to change swords? Beidou's sword chi wreaked havoc in Light Luminary's body, destroying everything in an instant, and also cutting off the possibility of him perishing together. A swordsman understood swordsman the best, and would not give him such a chance. Light Luminary was paralyzed in the void, but he did not show any disappointment. He only praised, "Good sword." Chapter 1644. Bei Gue smiled proudly. "I'm not as good as you in terms of mid-range and long-range attacks, but in terms of close combat, you're not as good as me." The sword is ultimately a weapon for close combat. Xianyuan, you're on the wrong path. Guang Yao's face was full of disdain. It wasn't that he didn't accept this swordsman, but he didn't accept his theory. His current state was very awkward. At the very least, such a serious injury had destroyed his path of cultivation. Not to mention becoming a half-immortal, he didn't even have any hope of becoming a sun god. And this was under the condition of immediate treatment. To a swordsman, this was something he couldn't tolerate. But he still tried his best to maintain his life. Not because he was afraid of death, but because he wanted to see the result. Because he knew that his junior brother would definitely rush over. The guy was very evil. Bei Gui looked at his expression and was very curious. You still don't accept it? Yes, a swordsman should be like this. But I'm not a Buddhist, nor an Orthodox Taoist. I'm from the sword catacomb, the purest way of the sword in the universe. What do you have to accept? Guang Yao knew that his life had come to an end, and his mood calmed down. After nearly 2,000 years of cultivation, there were regrets and unwillingness, but there were also good things. At least in terms of the result, this was very swordsman. Dying under a flying sword was the best ending for a swordsman. It was much better than dying under Buddhism. You defeated me, that's a fact. But that doesn't mean you could deny my swordsmanship. It's just that I'm not good enough. What does it have to do with whether the orthodoxy is right or wrong? If one day you're also defeated by another swordsman, won't your orthodoxy deviate? Bei Gui nodded, then shook his head. I've never been defeated, at least after coming to the origin world. Other than the sun god who has the ability to be reborn, I've never been defeated. If one day I'm defeated by another swordsman, I'll definitely reconsider if my orthodoxy is wrong. If I don't admit my mistakes, a swordsman will never grow. He laughed self-deprecatingly. If you're sincerely convinced by my sword catacomb swordsmanship, I don't mind helping you recover. Although it was impossible for him to recover to his original state, maintaining his lifespan for several hundred years was not a problem. Don't think that I'm trying to be friendly with Xianyuan. He's not worthy yet. Ever since I came to the origin world, you're the only opponent I can't bear to kill. The others have already sacrificed themselves to my sword, so I don't feel like wasting my breath on them. The reason why I didn't kill you was because, at the very least, you made me taste defeat in the mid-range and long-range battles. Just based on this, I can let you off. Beta was very proud. With this body's personality, if the opponent was worthless, he would kill without batting an eyelid. However, if the opponent was stronger than him in some aspect, he would be able to learn something. On the contrary, he would be merciful. Unfortunately, this was the first person he had met since he came out. Moreover, it seemed that this person did not appreciate his kindness at all. The more ungrateful he was, the more he would do the opposite. This was his character. Because of this, he had received a lot of education from his senior brothers in the Sword Tomb. Brilliant Light refused without hesitation. I don't need anyone's help. Whether I live or die, only I can decide. I won't accept it willingly. As for why, you'll know soon enough. When the time comes and we're lying together, I'm very curious what else you'll say. To be honest, the reason why I'm enduring is because I want to see this. Beidou was very sharp. You have a companion? Stronger than you? So you think he'll avenge you? I'm suddenly interested. All right, I'll give you a chance. Let's see if both of us are lying here, or if you and your senior brothers are lying here. There's a big truth that you might not like to hear. The reason why you were able to contend with me for such a long time was because I wanted to experience Xuanyuan's mid-range and long-range attacks. If I only wanted to kill you, I wouldn't have needed to play those useless sword games with you. Do you admit that if I wanted to get close to you, you wouldn't be able to stop me? Brilliant Light was silent. This was because the actual situation had already been determined. Until now, he still did not understand how to avoid the opponent's approach. There was almost no solution because no matter how fast he fled, he could not be faster than a flying sword. His opponent was a flying sword, so how could he avoid it? But even if he did not understand, it did not affect his confidence in his junior brother. It was very baffling, but that was what he believed. This was because ever since his junior brother started learning the sword, he had been creating miracles. Every swordsman in the dome, especially those advanced cultivators, understood how difficult it was to do all this. But if they considered that this was someone that Jiu had his eyes on, it seemed that everything was very natural. Beidou pondered and said, "That's not right. You only have 5 rings, and 7 people came. You're the only swordsman. Then who else is worth you waiting here to see me make a fool of myself? I know. Is it the one among the star-plucking cultivators? He's a swordsman? And that's right. He killed faster than me. But what you don't know is that the two of us fought in different environments. If I were to fight in the battlefield like him, I would definitely be faster than him." Brilliant Light was speechless. A defeated person should not show off his eloquence. He only wanted to see. It was not even for his own hatred. He just wanted to know what level his junior brother's swordsmanship would reach when he went all out. This was what he was truly concerned about. As the saying goes, the pot never breaks apart from the well. It was inevitable that a general would die on the battlefield. A sword cultivator like him might not be as good as Lu Xiaoyi, who had killed countless people, but he had killed many cultivators. It was worth it. He saw Beidou sitting cross-legged in the distance and adjusting his body. It seemed that this guy did not look like he was number 1 in the world, but when facing a tough battle, he still had the caution that a swordsman should have. What kind of place was this sword mount? How could this person transform into a sword? This was completely illogical. Was it related to Xuanyuan's sword mount small world? Brilliant Light's mind was filled with countless thoughts, but he could not verify them. He did not regret it. He could also feel his junior brother's intentions in the miniature scene, but he could not accept it. Even now, he still believed that his choice was not wrong. If he accepted it, he would lose his sword heart. If he did not accept it, he would lose his life just like now. The cultivation world was really cruel. While waiting, Backstab quickly recovered to his peak state. His words were not wrong. If he wanted to, he could really kill Radiant Light in a short period of time. This was the unique characteristic of the sword vein. As long as I could completely suppress you in a certain aspect, the battle would end abnormally quickly, even if both sides were actually very close in terms of cultivation level. It was completely different from magic cultivators. If their cultivation level was close, it would mean endless delay. They would fully display this difference through time. "How long do I have to wait? Did you leave a guide?" Beta shouted from afar. Brilliant Light shook his head and looked into the distance. There a shooting star was quickly flying over. "I did not leave a guide. Xianyuan people would never do such a thing. But he will definitely come looking for you. Look, isn't that right? Congratulations. Your life has entered the countdown." Chapter 1645. Lu Xiaoyi flew across the sky and sighed inwardly. He was still too late. He ignored the unfamiliar swordsman and came to his senior brother's side. "Senior brother, are you returning to your position? Do you have a sister-in-law to take care of?" "I'm duty-bound to do so." Guang Yao chuckled. This guy was always like this. It was good because he wasn't like those boring heroes who were short-tempered and sentimental. The swordsman's death was his final destination. What was there to fuss about? "I'm sorry to disappoint you. Sister-in-law doesn't have a sister-in-law. She has a lot of trouble. We'll talk about this in the future. I had a fair battle with this guy with my back to him. I was inferior and embarrassed Xianyuan. My life and death has nothing to do with him." However, he seemed to look down on Xuanyuan's swordsmanship. He said that mid-range and long-range attacks were wrong, and that only close combat was the right way. "I lost, so I can't refute. Go teach him what the true sword vein is." Lu Xiaoyi stretched out his hand and whispered, "Senior brother, can you stop pretending? Your insides are spoiled, and I suspect that there was someone else behind this battle. You're a hindrance here. I still have to take care of your old life. Don't watch. I'll send you to the dimensional space. Leave the rest to me. I promise I'll settle everything." Guang Yao glared at him. "You don't know if your insides are spoiled? If you don't see the outcome with your own eyes, not only will your insides be spoiled, even your heart will be spoiled. I don't need you to take care of me. I still have the strength to end my own life. If you want to save me, you have to save my heart first. If I can't watch Xuanyuan's swordsmanship show off in the universe, nothing can save me. Go quickly. Don't be so wishy-washy. You look like you don't care, but you're actually doing the same old cliché. I don't need anyone's sympathy. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. He was really a stone in a latrine pit, smelly and stubborn. These seniors and juniors only knew how to imitate Crow ancestors' glamorous methods, but they didn't learn the essence of Crow ancestors' shamelessness. Forget it. I have to let senior brother vent his anger, right? If you throw him into a dimensional space, he won't be able to see anything. To the current him, that would be worse than death. He stood in front of the unfamiliar swordsman. Xianyuan Lu Xiaoyi. I heard that you have a different opinion on Xuanyuan's sword Dao. Beiho's expression was solemn. Just from hearing this name, he knew that he had encountered a true peak figure in Xianyuan. Although he wasn't familiar with the origin world's cultivation world and didn't care about it, this person's reputation wasn't something you couldn't hear even if you didn't care about it. Even though he was only a Yin master, this did not mean that he could be underestimated. Back of the sword mount, I have a different opinion because I am the winner. If you want to prove anything, you'll have to rely on your sword skills. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. All right, let me correct you for your first mistake. Mid-range and long-range attacks are useless. I'll let you know that if I want to kill you from mid-range, you can only be killed from mid-range. You want to get close? Are you dreaming? A river of swords gushed out. A river of swords that was exactly the same as radiant lights. Beiho cursed inwardly. He transformed into a sword dragon and instantly displayed his strongest defensive state. It was also a river of swords, but Lu Xiaoyi's river of swords was completely different from radiant lights. Radiant light's sword had 4 layers, while Lu Xiaoyi's was 3. This meant that the speed of sword light division had a qualitative increase. Most importantly, Radiant Light's maximum sword light division was only 600,000, while Lu Xiaoyi's sword light division was close to 2 million. How much spiritual energy would be needed to support so many sword lights? If one had to compare, Radiant Light's River of Swords was a normal river of a region, while Lu Xiaoyi's River of Swords directly opened a hole in your head and poured the River of Swords down. 2 million swords simultaneously gathered and dispersed. The 5 elements, slaughter, void, and impermanence were all in a pot of chaos. It looked chaotic, but in fact, there were layers of changes hidden within. The pressure was so heavy that it caused his sword dragon to be compressed by more than half. From a huge dragon to a mini dragon. Rude, crude, tyrannical, unreasonable. The majestic river of swords surrounded the backstab, gathering and changing at any moment. The clanging sounds of swords falling down were as dense as the rain, never stopping for even a second. Every strike would take away a large amount of sword light. In a few breaths' time, Beiho found that his sword dragon had been stripped to the point that it looked like a sword staff. No matter which flying sword his main body was on, he couldn't fly out. So how could he get close? In a few breaths' time, the frequency of his flying swords was completely defeated by his opponent. It was like a check against a Gatling gun. Speed, power, quantity, sword light division, no matter which aspect it was, he was crushed. Unstoppable, like a hot knife through butter. The last flying sword was pressed against his forehead. Actually, it wasn't just his forehead, but all the important parts of his body were pressed against. He was like a straw doll that had been stabbed by a village woman. It just didn't pierce in. Lu Xiaoyi shouted, I told you to fight from afar. So you have to fight from afar? I said 100,000 miles, but you can't even think of 90,000 miles. Do you have a temper? The sword light was retracted, and he pulled out his sword. He held it in his hand. Sword? You think you are invincible with a sword? You don't want to be controlled by the Celestial Empire. Fine, then let's compete in sword wielding. This daddy will beat you up until your own mother can't recognize you. The distance of 10,000 miles was covered in the blink of an eye. With a wave of his sword, he slashed down. He looked like a hooligan on the streets. Beiho was stunned. He hadn't completely recovered from his opponent's mid to long-range attacks. Instinctively turning into a sword cage was his most familiar fighting method, and it was also the method he was most confident in. Not only was his killing speed extremely fast, Any weapon wouldn't be able to last long under his sword cage, because at this moment his sword was his person, and his person was his sword. But after roaming the universe for a long time, he finally met a ghost. The guy in front of him wasn't even a sword, nor was he a person. He didn't know what the sword his hand was made of, but the sword he had turned into felt pain as if his arms and legs were being broken. The key point was that this person was like a pig. His hands were chopping people, and his body was pushing the sword outwards. You only need to imagine a Buddha emitting golden light all over, and you only need to turn the golden light into sword light. In a few breaths, Beiho's limbs were all broken. Similarly, the sword aura entered his body, and his entire flesh was damaged. He lifted him up and threw him to glorious light. You two brothers, get closer. Glorious light was dumbfounded. What kind of swordsmanship was this? What kind of ingenuity was this? First a Gatling gun, then a tortoise ate swords, but this was the essence of the sword. They were competing on the foundation. If my foundation was far better than yours in all aspects, what use would your so-called ingenuity be? Of course, the entire process still implied psychological suppression. So he had to first stun Bei-ho from a distance, then get close and completely destroy the foundation of his confidence. This sequence couldn't be wrong. If he got close from the start, it would be hard to say who would win. Glorious Light was dumbfounded, and Bei-ho was too ashamed to show his face. Lu Xiaoyi looked into the distance. It's time to show my true swordsmanship. Next, this daddy will kill a sun god for you to see. Chapter 1646. In the void, a figure slowly appeared. He quietly watched the 3 swordsmen in front of him. 2 were injured and 1 was intact. Although he didn't completely reach his goal, it was barely satisfactory. Beiju shouted, "Swordsman matters will be resolved among swordsmen." "Senior, why did you follow us here?" He was very uneasy and realized that he might have been involved in some conspiracy. Although he had always been wary of this sun god, he really didn't expect him to appear here. This didn't conform to the way his sun god did things. It was too sneaky and too suspicious. The sun god smiled. "I happened to pass by and happened to see the 3 of you fighting here. I was curious and wanted to find out. Well, I also happened to have some grudges with one of you, so I wanted to settle it here. Isn't it too much?" He said it lightly, but everyone knew that it was just nonsense. Even if it was a deliberate arrangement, they couldn't say anything because the real reason for the fight was them. If they wanted to blame someone, they had to blame their bad tempers as swordsmen. Couldn't they have put friendship first and school skills second, just like the law lineage? Couldn't they have appreciated each other's feelings? Beiju knew that Xian Yuan was the sword vein of the main world. So couldn't he have shown mercy and formed a good relationship? Lu Xiaoyi knew that someone had bad intentions and was secretly setting things up. Couldn't he have deliberately set a trap to lure this person out? Among the 3 swordsmen, as long as 2 of them weren't injured, they would have a chance to fight any sun god. However, the bad temper of the swordsmen had injured 2 of them, and it was the kind of irreversible damage that affected their foundation. This really couldn't be blamed on anyone, but only Lu Xiaoyi knew that this was his only choice. Beiju had to die, no matter who he was. If he made a mistake, he had to pay the price. No reason could offset it. It didn't matter who was behind him. Moreover, if he hadn't hurt Beiju deeply enough, this sun god might not have been willing to stand up. "Which high priest of Hung River is it? Why are you so enthusiastic?" "Originally, I just wanted to kill Hengyang god for fun. But senior, you came all the way here to make up for me?" The sun god was unmoved. "I'm Li Taikan of Hung River. I'm here to settle a grudge with you. I won't say much. I both know the reason. Of the 3 of you, 2 of you are seriously injured. I won't touch them as hostages. But, little friend, you have to accompany me to the fullest. You can't give up halfway and leave halfway." The meaning was clear. Lu Xiaoyi did not refuse. In fact, there was no reason for him to back down from this battle. What Li Taikan said about not coercing the 2 cripples in battle was actually meaningless. The 2 of them were already in such a state. What could he coerce them to do? Both of them had bad tempers and stubborn tempers. If one did not force them, there was an 80% chance that they would end their own lives. So, why should one reach out and stain one's hands with blood and cause two great karmas for no reason? The only thing he was worried about was that Lu Xiaoyi would realize that he was no match for him and use his sword as an excuse to escape. Therefore, he had to bite him to death verbally. But this was exactly what Lu Xiaoyi wanted. Up until now, he had killed a lot of young gods. Some took advantage of the chaos to attack. Some took advantage of the situation to beat them up. And some used strange moves in one-on-one battles. But it was his first time facing a young god face-to-face, and a powerful one at that. It was time. In the cultivation world of the main world, whether or not Lu Xiaoyi had the ability to do whatever he wanted was a touchstone. He had a reason to fight to the death. He took out a short sword from the ring and broke it. Although he did not make an oath, for a swordsman, it meant everything. Li Taikan also did not make an oath. Instead, he waved his hand, cut off a lock of his hair, and tied it to his finger. In Hengi Jia, this meant that he would take his head and fight to the death. Although there were all kinds of calculations in the early stages, when the battle approached, both of them chose the most cultivation method. This was also an external expression that would appear when one's state of mind reached a certain level. In the face of life and death, one would throw away everything. Backline felt his mouth dry. His current situation was not at all better than light illuminations. They were just two balls of minced meat in the void. But the two of them did not care. This was such a delightful thing, to be able to meet a powerful opponent and witness a great battle. For a swordsman, there was nothing more perfect than this. This was the virtue that he had cultivated in his previous life. Can your junior brother do it? I heard that Hengi Li Taikan say that he has already killed a Hengi Yang god. Light illumination was disdainful. The two of them did not have a great hatred of life and death. This was also a manifestation of a cultivator's open-mindedness to a certain extent. It was as if they were a pair of bad friends watching a dream show. Whether or not he can do it, you don't know. You were beaten like a dog. Why aren't you spouting nonsense anymore? Hengi Yang god. Little E had already killed one when he passed by Hengi. This is not strange. When he was traveling in the void, he basically killed everyone along the way. He did not pick an opponent, nor did he care about the realm. What? You were the one who attracted this young god, but you still don't understand. Backline felt that he had to explain clearly. If he was in his normal state, he would be too lazy to explain. Now that he was not far from death, he did not want to leave behind any regrets and make people suspicious. Most importantly, if this Lu Xiaoyi really killed the young god, he should not go looking for trouble with the sword tomb. Although he was only at the middle level in the sword tomb, and a few of his senior brothers were far stronger than him, this Lu Xiaoyi was too strange, so it was best not to leave behind any disaster for his sect. You can eat whatever you want, but you can't speak whatever you want. I also met this person by chance in the void. We are not friends. We are just using each other. I used him to achieve my goal of seeing the people of the main world, and he also used me. Now it seems that he used me to lure out your junior brother. Let me tell you the truth. The two of us are just supporting characters, clowns who warm up the scene. The root of the problem lies with them. Well, actually, it lies with your unruly junior brother. We are all King victims. Guang Yao was speechless. This guy still had some foresight. He knew where the root of the disaster was. As far as I know, this seems to be the fourth or fifth young god. Little E has experience in killing young gods, but before, he was always looking for an opening. Killing this young god once or several times may not be difficult for little E. The difficult part is when to find out his past and future. During this period, he can't make even a single mistake. If it were me, I can only say that I can attack and defend from a distance, but I don't dare to say that I will definitely kill him. Backline felt very superior. I won't fight him from a distance. I will definitely kill him at close range. But I don't know if I can kill him a second time, because I might not be able to get close a second time. Guang Yao was very confident in his junior brother. Just watch. Little E is no stranger to Hengi River system. This guy is very crafty. Chapter 1647. Lu Xiaoyi was the first to launch his attack. The first thing he had to figure out was which main god branch of Hengyi system this Li Taikan belonged to. Only then would he be able to target him better. No one would reveal their true roots to others. They could only use their fist to reveal it. Even though they were 100,000 li apart, Lu Xiaoyi's leap was as if he was walking in the air. The speed of his evasion technique was so fast that it seemed to go against the natural laws of evasion. For example, Radiant Light's evasion technique could be roughly guessed where he would go. However, Lu Xiaoyi's leap gave off a feeling as if space was being torn apart and his body was twitching. His speed was always changing. If he wasn't accelerating, then he was decelerating. This meant that even if you could predict his trajectory in advance, you wouldn't be able to land an attack on him. That was because this person would either run past you, or he hadn't arrived yet. The direction was also constantly changing, and it was not a straight line, but a straight line. It was as if it was always running in a circle, and there were always corners. The most annoying thing was that the diameter of the circle was constantly changing. It was either a big circle or a small circle, and there were even irregular shapes such as ellipses. This made his tracks clearly visible to the naked eye, but you wouldn't know where he would land next. Because his evasion technique was filled with vector speed, the spectators felt as if they were being torn apart. It was like a picture of stagnation. Sometimes it was congealed, sometimes it was smooth. It suddenly rose and fell, slow and fast. The greatest advantage of this evasion technique was that every breath and every moment was a window for him to unleash his sword. For example, Radiant Light was also an expert in evading and controlling his sword. However, if one were to break down his movements frame by frame, one would discover that there was a pattern to his evading and unleashing his sword. He wouldn't unleash his sword when he was rushing forward. This was because when both parties were moving at high speed, it would affect the precision of the flying sword. He would only unleash his sword when his evading speed was slightly reduced. Therefore, strictly speaking, the control of a swordsman's sword was constantly changing between hurried and slow. Hurried was to change his position, slow was to unleash his flying sword. When a swordsman made this method coherent enough, it was a sword control. However, Lu Xiaoyi's sword control was different. He didn't have a regular pattern of hurried and slow. This was because he was always changing. Through this change, he could achieve the effect of evading quickly. At the same time, he gained another benefit. He was ready to unleash his sword at any time in a slow state. He could maintain his strongest sword state at any time and place. Coupled with his abnormal sword light division, each wisp of sword light was heavier than the others. When all these were combined together, there was no such thing as sword moves or secret methods, because a casual strike of his would be a powerful secret method sword move to others. This was the result of displaying his foundation to the extreme. Under such extreme conditions, even someone as strong as the sun godly Taikan could only parry for a while without the power to counterattack. After hundreds of years, this was also the first time Lu Xiaoyi was unscrupulous in front of the sun god. Under his accumulation, his swordsmanship had unknowingly reached a new level. Although he still didn't know what level he had reached, now that he entered the last few stages of the sword Dao steel, even the crow ancestor wouldn't be able to kill him. That crocodile was a little depressed because even though he was watching from the side, he still had a splitting headache because Lu Xiaoyi's escape method was always changing vector speed. In order to see more clearly, his divine sense had to be in a kind of irregular speed, sometimes strong and sometimes weak, sometimes fast and sometimes slow. It made his head hurt. Is it because I'm too injured that my brain is damaged? Why do I feel like he's tired from escaping? It's not that he's tired, it's me. Light Illumination was also having a headache, because he also had a splitting headache. It was true that both of them were seriously injured, but as a bystander, what would happen if he was really in the battlefield? Not to mention attacking with his sword. Even his divine sense couldn't hold on for a long time. This was a new escape method, but he didn't know what kind of escape method could be used to achieve it. In any case, with the escape method he had mastered now, he definitely couldn't do it. He was afraid that it could only be like Lu Xiaoyi's stars pulling, millions of stars working together. But this thing, was it so easy to learn? I'm tired too. If you're tired, then close your eyes. Why are you looking at him? Can't you look at the sun god? This person's skin is really thick. I saw that he had been cut a few times, but he didn't seem to be in any big trouble. I just don't know how long he can last like this. The sun god was suppressed to this extent by the yin god. I wonder how he feels. Do you regret making that bet to the death now? Li Taikan didn't regret it. For the sun god, regret meant that his state of mind was lost, and it meant that his defeat was revealed. Therefore, he couldn't regret it. The swordsman's attack power was far beyond his expectations, but that wasn't the most important thing. The most important thing was that the swordsman's movement method was giving him a headache. It wasn't a real headache like the 2 chunks of meat, but a headache that made him unable to use many of his attack methods. For this kind of escape method that completely exceeded the common sense of cultivation, it was best to use an artifact that could lock onto the target. But he couldn't find an artifact that could keep up with the swordsman's rhythm while constantly accelerating. If he couldn't keep up, what was the point of using it? Or use a divine ability? But for the same reason, just locking onto the opponent would consume a lot of his energy, so he couldn't use it to its fullest potential. This was a dilemma. From the beginning of the battle, he was forced into a passive position. This was something he didn't expect. Saberhan's death wasn't unjust, since the swordsman displayed such great strength from the beginning. He couldn't use the power of a normal sun god to take down the swordsman. He could only use his true foundation. His roots in the Hengi realm did not belong to the 3 main gods, nor did he walk the path of the Bodhisattva of joy. What he cultivated was the great Python god, a god with a human body and a snake's head, under the lineage of Maharaga of the 8 tribes dragons. The Hengi realm and the cultivation system of the origin world began to deviate from each other when one reached the sun god stage. For example, Li Taikan's foundation to reach the sun god stage was to reach the great Mang stage. In the future, he would evolve in this direction as he continued to advance. He couldn't fight the swordsman with his mortal body anymore. Even if he had the ability of rebirth, he didn't want to be killed again and again. This wasn't just a matter of face, but a matter of mentality. If rebirth became a habit, it would become a habit. While sacrificing his life, he would risk looking for his opponent's weakness and then slowly expose his past and future through rebirth again and again. He didn't advocate this kind of fighting method. In the Hengi realm, he belonged to the faction that didn't use rebirth as a fighting method. Therefore, in the eyes of the 3 swordsmen, the sun god turned into a giant great python god with a human body and a snake head, with a flower drum at his waist and a drumstick in his hand. Chapter 1648. Once Li Taikan's godly python form was formed, his body's defensive capabilities were raised to a whole new level. Once his defensive capabilities were raised, he would dare to move and use his divine abilities. This was very important in the river of swords that numbered in the millions. His left hand slapped the flower drum, and with him, as the center, a visible shockwave rippled out like a stone thrown into water. This was a kind of divine sense disturbance technique, which was similar to Takizawa's Shensi cauldron. Through the resonance of the divine sense at different frequencies, it could affect the opponent's divine sense judgment, and then affect the control of the flying swords. For a sword cultivator, it was shaking the foundation of their attack. His right hand shook the drumstick, and a thick bolt of lightning flashed out, striking Lu Xiaoyi, who was in the midst of escaping. His entire body was char-black, and his hair stood on end. He didn't know how much damage was done. Once Li Taikan's godly python form appeared, he immediately turned the tables. Although compared to the other godly pythons of the Hung River orthodoxies, it wasn't as shocking as a few moves, but his 2 techniques complemented each other very well and were very coordinated. One was the main disruptor, and the other was the main attacker. Combined with his godly python form, he was basically invincible in both offense and defense. Lu Xiaoyi didn't seem to feel it, as if the attack was aimed at someone else and not him. His sword wasn't messed up at all, but his movements weren't as agile as Chu Yi's at the beginning. As for his movement, it was still the same, maintaining that uncomfortable, wrinkled rhythm. Li Taikan's attack succeeded, and he immediately launched a series of attacks. The rhythm of his left hand slapping the waist drum became faster and faster, and the range of his drumstick became more and more unrestrained. Finding your weakness and going all out was the way of a cultivator. This wasn't the time to be polite. In his imagination, he originally wanted to use the normal abilities of a young spirit cultivator to take down this little god, but he knew something was wrong the moment he made contact. That was why his natal godly image changed. There were many orthodoxies in the Hung River realm, and their knowledge was vast. Although they were isolated due to their own orthodoxies, they had never stopped researching the orthodoxies of the cultivation world, especially in a few key directions, such as the sword vein orthodoxy. Of course, a cultivator's cultivation was about letting nature take its course. You couldn't decide your own direction because of others. Instead, everything should come from your own interests, characteristics, and strengths. Among the many young gods in the Hengi realm, Li Taikan was ranked at the top, especially in the ability to deal with the sword vein. He was second to none and had unique, innate conditions. It was precisely because his god's image's abilities were specifically targeted at swordsmen that he was sent to Chaos Weave to deal with the problem. That was why he was sent to intercept the swordsman with the anchor chain. It wasn't without reason, but there was a deeper layer of consideration involved. That was why he decided to fight to the death. That was because the flower drum's mind disruption was extremely effective against flying, sword-type spiritual sense attacks. No matter how fast or how ingenious the swordsman's movements were, he would never be able to evade the lightning bolts. With these two methods, in addition to his rebirth ability, how could he possibly fail? It was only a matter of time. However, his confidence came a little too early. After the first lightning bolt struck the swordsman unexpectedly, the second lightning bolt struck the swordsman with even more power, but didn't seem to have any effect. The thick lightning bolt struck down, but a sword pagoda appeared above Lu Xiaoyi's head. Due to the lightning's special properties, it was impossible for it to turn at such a fast speed. Therefore, the lightning bolt struck the sword pagoda and disappeared without a trace. The huge amount of energy was directed somewhere else. Li Taikan's eyes narrowed. Sure enough, he had some tricks up his sleeve. He could see that the lightning bolt's energy was directed into a portable space. This kind of defensive technique was not uncommon in the cultivation realm. It was to use spatial abilities to transfer the opponent's spells into a portable space. As long as the portable space was big enough, the enemy's attacks would never be able to fill up the hole. Thus, the goal of full defense was achieved. However, although this method was very mysterious and could deal with most spells and artifacts, it was very difficult to deal with a lightning bolt's downward strike. That was because the lightning bolt was simply too fast. It was so fast that the cultivator wouldn't even have the time to react after seeing the lightning bolt strike. The lightning bolt struck from one side, and the lightning bolt struck from another. The cultivator's reaction time was less than 1,000th of an instant. How could he perfectly control the lightning bolt's energy and channel it into his portable space? Of course, he didn't know that there was something called a lightning rod in a certain world. Therefore, he was still experimenting with it. He changed the rhythm, angle, and strength of the lightning bolt to see if it was just a coincidence. Some were anxious, such as the 2 lumps of minced meat far away. Finally, there's a way to deal with it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to fight. Hey, is this method of resisting the lightning bolt from Xinyuan? Or your junior brothers? It's very mysterious and interesting. I think he's just channeling the lightning into his portable space, right? This was the first time Beiju saw such a method of resisting lightning. Previously, when he was fighting with Guang Yao, he was also struck by lightning from the secret lightning sword. At that time, he used the sword dragon and his body to resist it. In fact, he didn't have any special methods. Now that he saw Lu Xiaoyi's ingenious defense, he was very envious. Even if he didn't have long to live, he could die at night. For a swordsman, every special sword technique was worthy of their devotion. However, Guang Yao couldn't tell him. Even if this person died immediately after hearing it, he couldn't tell him. This was the rule. This is the lightning evasion technique passed down by the crow ancestor. It can't be passed down to anyone who isn't a direct descendant of Xin Yuan. Therefore, the sun god can only use lightning once. After that, no matter how sharp or majestic his lightning technique is, it will be futile. You want to know? If you don't use your special skill of the sword catacomb in exchange, is it possible? Beiju was speechless. Although his heart was itching, the inheritance of the cultivation world was no joke. Thus, he changed the topic. This Hengyang god's lightning is useless, but I don't know if he has any other powerful methods. His flower drum's interference. Even though we are so far away, we can still feel it very clearly. It has a huge impact on mid-range and long-range flying sword attacks. I'll say the same thing. I don't approve of the swordsman focusing too much on mid-range and long-range attacks, because there are too many methods to disturb the mind in the cultivation world. It's impossible to guard against them. The higher the realm, the more mysterious it is. I admit that the power of your junior brother's sword is rarely seen in the world. However, a battle between cultivators involves too many aspects. How can you be so foolish as to pursue a certain aspect to solve it? One sword breaking 10,000 techniques refers to one sword breaking 10,000 techniques at close range. This is because distance can offset the opponent's reaction time. If you're far away, you'll have enough time to react. One sword breaking 10,000 techniques is a joke. Chapter 1649. Both of them were masters of the sword vein. Even though their bodies were weak, they had great foresight. They knew very well that if the swordsman couldn't control his flying swords accurately, it would affect his strength greatly. In order to counteract such an effect, one would have to invest more spiritual energy. Over time, one's spiritual energy would be depleted quickly. Even if one's magical energy was abundant, it would be useless. That was why they were worried. No one, including Beiho, wanted to see Lu Xiaoyi fail, because that would be the failure of the sword vein. However, they couldn't do anything about it. This wasn't their battle. If it was their turn, even their yang god might not be able to summon the celestial python form. Li Taikan's lightning was useless. No matter how he tried, the swordsman's sword pagoda would always be able to restrain the lightning into his dimensional pocket without fail. This meant that the swordsman had a set of techniques that he was familiar with. He could only give up. However, that didn't mean that he didn't have any other tricks up his sleeve. He clasped his hands together and chanted a spell. In an instant, a sacred river appeared in the sky. It didn't attack, but stood between the two like a boundary between the Chu River and the Han River. He knew that the swordsman was very familiar with the attack and defense of the sacred river. He had seen the power of the eternal river among the cultivators he had killed near the Hengi boundary. He had even personally traveled through the eternal river scroll. That was why the eternal river couldn't cause any fatal damage to him. The reason why he released, it was only to use it as a support, something that he could rely on during his escape. In terms of escape, even though he was a yang god, he was still weak in front of the swordsman's yin god. This was his most obvious weakness. However, if he could cross the river, he would have something to rely on during his escape. No matter how good the swordsman's escape was, he would still be affected when crossing the sacred river. This would achieve his goal. Since the lightning was useless, his next attack would have to target the swordsman first. This was also the most difficult part for him. He had thought about this battle very carefully. He had hesitated between using up his energy and ending it quickly. In the end, he decided to fight the swordsman head-on. There were many factors that made up his decision. As a dignified yang spirit, he deliberately wasted time with Yin's spirit. This was a sign of weakness in his state of mind. He, who had rich combat experience, knew that this was not advisable. He would lose his edge in the delay of time. On the other hand, the swordsman would gradually gain the upper hand in the battle of the week. Even a wise man would not do such a thing. In the grand ceremony of the Yang spirit in the Hengi realm, he was good at attacking. Attacking was what he was best at. There was no reason for him to choose something he was not good at to waste time because of the flying sword. If he couldn't fight as he wished, how much of his strength could he unleash? Finally, this place was actually not far from the position of the miniature star map, only 10 days away. It was hard to say whether or not an anchor chain cultivator would happen to pass by and see him, a Yang spirit, bullying a Yin spirit. If word got out, his reputation did not matter, but all of Hung He's previous efforts in the anchor chain would be in vain. Therefore, he had to fight back. Even if the swordsman's flying sword was very sharp, even if this sharpness could cause him harm at any time, he would not hesitate. If he couldn't unleash his full strength in battle, what was the point of cultivating for thousands of years? After he finished his preparations, he unleashed his spiritual sense and tried his best to capture the swordsman's tracks. At the same time, his body kept shuttling back and forth between the two sides of the eternal river. His goal was to force the swordsman to shuttling back and forth between the two sides of the eternal river. The slight delay during the shuttling would be the window of opportunity for him to attack. It was a very clever strategy. After several shuttling back and forth, Li Taikan found an opportunity. As soon as the swordsman emerged from the eternal river, he relied on the perception of the countless souls in the eternal river to determine his trajectory. He opened his mouth and spat out his serpent tongue like lightning, instantly covering a distance of tens of thousands of miles. At the same time, Lu Xiaoyi also made his move. How could he not know Li Taikan's intentions? The sacred river was placed here to provide cover for the enemy. He was also waiting for his opponent to attack. Only when his opponent attacked would his body be in a relatively weaker state. Only then would he be able to take advantage of the situation. Offense and defense were a pair of contradictory entities. At this moment, he was still able to control the sword river within his range of control. Li Taikan's waist drum didn't have much of an effect on him, because he had just experienced it in the previous battle. The reason why he pretended to have difficulty controlling the sword river was to wait for the right opportunity. Like now, when Li Taikan spat out his serpent tongue, this was a pure physical attack, imbued with godly strength and thunderous force. But because of this, the majority of his godly strength was placed on the serpent tongue. His sword river had always been in a state of being like a river in a tube. One was on top of his head, which was the origin of the flying swords. The other was on top of Li Taikan's body, which was the end point of the attack. There were millions of flying swords that constantly shot out, connecting the two through the sword river. However, this sword river was somewhat different from a normal sword river. It was a sword river that rolled inwards, like a spatial passage formed by irregular sword lights. Li Taikan spat out his serpent tongue. He had already created a shadow in his original position to deceive others, but his real body had already used the heaven-measuring sword ruler to teleport. This kind of teleportation was the most ordinary kind of teleportation. It was a foundation establishment skill, but it could be used continuously. It wouldn't be outdated even after reaching the monarch level. The only flaw was that its purpose was too obvious. As long as it was used, the opponent would immediately notice it. But he had added his own new thing to his usage, because when he came out, he wasn't in the void outside, but in his own sword river. All the aura, traces, and spatial fluctuations, because he was in the sword light passage formed by the flying swords, the extremely strong Tao realm power isolated the perception of others. Even the two cripples watching from the side couldn't see that the one left in place was a clone. The real body had already entered the sword light passage and came out. Not good. Why isn't Junior Brother moving? Luminous Light was shocked. He thought that this was because Lu Xiaoyi had been paralyzed for too long when he came out of the eternal river. This kind of physical attack was very dangerous. Once hit, even if you didn't die, you would be affected by the god power and you would become more and more passive. The long tongue coiled around Lu Xiaoyi's body, and the powerful god power instantly shattered his body into countless rays of light. It was only at this time that the three of them realized that this was just a sword puppet clone. Luminous Light's back puppet heaved a sigh of relief, but Li Taikan was vigilant. But his vigilance was too late. It had never stopped, and suddenly, a human head appeared in the midst of the flying swords that were whizzing downwards with a wave of the sword. The serpent body was separated. The back puppet praised, "Good. This kind of close combat technique already has some of my sword tomb's god power." Chapter 1650. Despite all his defenses, Lithicane was still killed by the swordsman without any mental preparation. He was old and experienced, but when it came to battle, the number of people he had killed with his thousands of years of life might not be comparable to Lu Xiaoyi. Bold and unconstrained thinking, rich imagination, and outstanding talent in battle. All these factors made Lu Xiaoyi's battle behavior full of unknowns. Glorious Light laughed loudly. "See, since there's a beginning, it's going to be interesting. I say, look at that Hung He-Yang God's rebirth. Can you see his past and future?" Factory was still thinking about that slash. He realized that no matter if it was timing, planning, or execution, every step was flawless and impeccable. Even a close combat expert like him might not be able to do it. That was because he had no problems with his skills, but there were many problems with his preparation and psychological guidance. Using his own sword river to create a spatial tunnel, such a wonderful idea made him admire him. Losing to such a swordsman was not shameful at all. At least, he had the qualifications to test his skills. Regarding the past and future, he really didn't know much. This made him blush with shame. In any case, he was a primordial spirit cultivator, but he didn't dare to cross the line in Yang God beheading. The Xianyuan swordsman had already abused Yang gods like vegetables. His guts were sky high, and he couldn't compare with the hooligans of the universe. I don't understand. This person is very firm about the future. Even Meiho Luojia, the only future, didn't hide anything. What's the point of doing this? Glorious Light was a cultivator of the origin world after all. His understanding of the various orthodoxies was much deeper than back trees. Yang gods have a past and a future. The past has already happened, and the future is a vision. Both can provide support for rebirth in the present world. That's why cultivators cover it up in every way possible, thinking that it's the source of rebirth. But some orthodoxies do the opposite, deliberately fixing their own source of rebirth. It's not only to express their firm heart towards the Tao, but also to obtain unexpected assistance in their cultivation. Thus, there was the concept of a fixed vision. Normally, these special sects all have extremely clear and unquestionable future goals. For example, this Li Taikan, his future goal can't be any other than Meiho Roha. Instead of trying to hide, he might as well express it out clearly. That way, he'll be able to borrow more power from the god. Back puppet nodded. Understand. Their orthodoxy actually treats the past and the future separately. He had tried his best to cover up his past, thinking that it was the foundation of his rebirth. However, he had fixed his future as the only one. He had made his intentions clear, so as to gain more support from God. By doing so, you're not concealing yourself in exchange for an additional portion of divine power, allowing your strength to stand out among those of the same level. Isn't that right? Guangyao nodded. That's right. It was meaningless to Taoism and most other orthodoxies, because no matter whether we have a fixed vision for the future or not, we won't get any practical benefits. What we get is only a kind of self-improvement. Moreover, our Taoism's theoretical system is natural and doesn't reject change. Therefore, no one would be stupid enough to fix a fixed vision for the future. Anyway, there are many visions, so why not list them one by one? It's not only for possible changes, but also for a way to protect life. Back Puppet smiled and said, "It's all reasonable. and there's no distinction between good and bad. This sun god's future is easy to kill, so there's no need to think about it. However, his past is not so easy to choose. He only died once, and I didn't see anything. Nearly 100 pasts are mixed together, so who knows which one is the true source of his past. This was a normal situation. Ordinary sun gods had 2 layers of protection, the past and the future, while Taikan only had 1 layer of protection, the past. Of course, he had the time to put in a lot of effort and make enough concealment. With only 1 kill, there was no valuable information at all. Guang Yao couldn't say anything either. Both of them were big brothers, so not to mention second brother, they had limited experience in this area. But this was also the joy of cultivation. Back Puppet complained, "Look at what this person has experienced in his previous life." I want to talk about the other slightly normal things. Look at his past. There are people who defecate and pee in the open. There are people who feed rats in the temple. There are people who drink cow urine to cure diseases. There are also people who smear cow dung all over their bodies to prevent epidemics. And there's even a life where he married a cow. How can people choose? The 2 useless people were very depressed because they couldn't learn anything in this process. They had no idea what the past was like. First, they really didn't have much experience in this area. And second, the people of Hengi were different. But Lu Xiaoyi was different. With just 1 kill, he could see a lot of things. For example, the worship of cows. As for those ignorant living customs, in fact, they existed in many underdeveloped human planets. Every society had such a process, and in the end, they could completely walk out of it. It was just that the people of Hengi Jie spent too much time in this process, so long that they seemed unwilling to walk out of it. Of course, cows were very good animals and friends of humans. Cow urine and cow dung were not necessarily dirty. He liked such docile creatures very much. There were also legends of immortals riding cows in Taoism. It could be seen in the main world, people liked cows the same way. It was just that the people of Hengi Jie liked cows a little more. There were also different understandings. For example, he liked to brag, but there were people of Hengi Jie who actually used cows. Although he couldn't be sure and couldn't even define the general range, he knew that this person's past must be related to cows. In the tradition of Hengi Jie, this was not a curse, but a kind of glory. He had to continue killing. One time was far from enough. There was no way to find a real foothold in the nearly 100 episodes of the past. He knew very well that this was the only chance to kill at close range. If he used it as a main attack method, he would sooner or later be destroyed by such a risky move. His philosophy was the opposite of Beihai's. He believed that the correct way to fight swordsmen should be to focus on long-range attacks, with the occasional close-range attack. This kind of thing was not conclusive. For humans, his philosophy was fine, but for non-humans, it was another matter. In the Sword Tao Steel, the 3 Qin advocated killing in the real world. This philosophy was indeed very hardy, but that was for the 3 Qin of Yang spirit. He didn't believe that the 3 Qin of Yin spirit could judge the past and future by killing in the real world. What kind of people were they? With his current strength, if he wanted to kill a Yang spirit like Li Taikan, he would need to plan carefully. How would he kill him just like that? The sword river rose again, and it was still the same as before. He wanted to see what changes this Yang spirit would make. In fact, the process of constantly showing off one's trump cards was also a way to expose the past and future. Chapter 1651. P.S. Grandpa Yuan is gone, but I can't stay calm. In this fickle society, we have lost a real scientist. Lida Khan was calm. There was nothing to be upset about, as he could afford to lose. He wouldn't change his strategy just because of a single blow. In his long life as a cultivator, he had been through many dangerous situations like this. His experience told him that the more dangerous the situation was, the more he had to persevere. Attacking was the only way to redeem himself. He had completely let go of his scruples. Because of this death, Lida Khan had completely returned to being himself. He no longer saw his opponent as a god, but as an enemy on the same level as himself. He no longer cared about his opponent's sword vein. In this world of cultivators, no one could be above the others. After his rebirth, Lidicon had taken on a new form. Before, he had a human body and a snake head, but now, he was in the form of a pure python. This was the fearless form among the 3 forms of Moho Loajia. His attacking power was much stronger than his original human form, but correspondingly, his defense didn't improve. Should he take the initiative to attack and kill his opponent, or should he wait for an opportunity to strike? Lidicon chose the former without hesitation. He didn't like to get an opportunity to attack through his rebirth, but if death was inevitable, why should he spend so much effort to defend? The swordsman was a human being too, and his body was weaker than his. He couldn't even bear a single defeat, so why should he back off? Moho Loajia had 3 forms. The human body and snake head was the balanced form, the full python form was the fearless form, and the last form was the chaotic form. When the chaotic form was completed, he would become a half-immortal. He was still a little bit away from this step. After transforming into the fearless form, Lidicon lost his waist drum and drumsticks because pythons didn't have hands. However, the functions of the waist drum and drumsticks were still there. They were in the python's body, and through the rolling of the python's body, they could create a stronger disturbance to the spiritual sense. In Lidicon's eyes, the disturbance to the spiritual sense was still effective. Although the swordsman must have a way to deal with it, it couldn't completely eliminate the effect of the disturbance. Therefore, as long as he kept up with this disturbance, he could reduce the pressure of the attack to a certain extent. His judgment was very accurate. Lu Xiaoyi did not have enough time to decipher the secret of the 3 heavenly treasures, so he could only increase the consumption of his mental power by several times. However, this kind of consumption would not last long. The boa's body could be big or small, light or heavy. It could be tens of thousands of miles long or as small as a foot long. When the boa expanded to tens of thousands of miles long, the battlefield would become small, and Lu Xiaoyi's nearly invincible movement would lose its meaning. Even if he tried his best to move as far as he could, the boa could only turn its head. Lu Xiaoyi felt that this was a little tricky. This thing was really too big, so big that there were targets everywhere. He didn't know where to start because he didn't know where this thing's Achilles heel was. Even if he were to chop off the python's body section by section, he wouldn't be able to finish it even if he tired himself to death. This serpent's body was like some kind of single-celled organism. If he cut it, it would reconnect and continue to grow endlessly. The head might be its Achilles heel, but the skull was hard, so he had to use his full strength. There weren't many opportunities like this. What surprised him was that the serpent's agility and speed were completely incompatible with its body. It wasn't clumsy at all as it moved. Perhaps it couldn't be compared to him in terms of subtle movements, but it could use its huge body to make up for this shortcoming. When it came to subtle movements, each had its own way. If he couldn't succeed in his attack, he would have trouble in his defense. The serpent had many ways to attack. It could whip and coil its body, bite and spit out its tongue. It could also use its divine ability to catch people off guard. Moreover, Lu Xiaoyi could never not be wary of its lightning ability. In such a narrow space, if he was struck by lightning and temporarily lost control, even if it was just for a moment, it could be fatal. Most importantly, in such a complicated situation, he couldn't afford to make even a single mistake. This was the first time Lu Xiaoyi had felt awkward in a battle where he couldn't even use his vertical escape. This was because his opponent had used the simplest method to break a sword cultivator's vertical sword technique, and that was its size. Tens of thousands of miles long, the boa body blocked a large part of the battlefield, making his sword move look like a joke in front of such a huge body. Lu Xiaoyi's sword river wasn't weaker than the serpent in terms of size. However, one was a sword projection, while the other was a real body. As they intertwined, the serpent was constantly torn apart, but it quickly recovered. The sword projection was also constantly dissipating under the impact of the serpent's divine power, but it was constantly reforming. Lytic Khan's serpent's body would last forever as long as his divine power didn't wither. As for Lu Xiaoyi's Sword River, as long as Seven Ant was there, it would last forever. In an intense battle of attrition, no one could gain the upper hand. Lu Xiaoyi was as calm as ever. His attacks on the serpent were very targeted. He didn't attack blindly or mindlessly. Instead, he used different Dao realms to attack the serpent from different positions. He only had one goal, which was to find the serpent's weakness and attack it with the most efficiency. In the world of cultivation, there was nothing without a weakness. If you couldn't kill it, it only meant that you didn't understand it well enough. How could you understand it? You couldn't keep it for observation, so you could only continuously attack it and determine its weakness from the results. He understood this process, and so did Lytic Khan. Both of them knew that the serpent's weakness would be found, but before that, Lu Xiaoyi had to make sure he didn't make any mistakes. Chu Hei was very nervous. It doesn't seem good to continue like this. I've seen your junior brother escape from death several times. He relied on luck to escape, but luck can't follow him forever. Guang Yao was even more worried. Look, haven't you always boasted that you're invincible in close combat? If you encounter such a huge monster, I'll ask you, how are you going to attack it in close combat? Your fart sword cage can't even cover this thing's tail. Chu Hei scratched his head. This was indeed a big problem. He had never encountered such a problem before. Close combat had its own internal mechanism, but if you were close to a giant object the size of a star, it would be very awkward. Seriously, in this case, it's better to run away. But how far is far? This thing is 50 to 60,000 miles long, right? Even if you run 100,000 miles away, it's only 2 body lengths. It's meaningless. If you run further, the power of the flying sword will drop severely, or you won't be able to reach it. Tell me, why did your junior brother bet with the sun god? At this time, I don't think there's any special way except to run. I think the sun god serpent form is easy to release, but not easy to withdraw. It can't change freely, which should be his biggest shortcoming. If he runs out to rest, can he still maintain this form? Guang Yao shouted, "You're talking nonsense. Xianyuan swordsmen will never retreat. This is not a slogan. I think the best way is to transform into a giant tens of thousands of miles tall." Chu Hei laughed. Is that still a swordsman? That's the category of body cultivators, okay? Chapter 1652. The worries of the two useless people were not unreasonable. They were both primordial spirit swordsmen and had sharp eyes. In fact, this was also a dead end that every low-level cultivator who wanted to challenge the Yang spirit would face. The Yang spirit could make mistakes, but you couldn't. How could you not make mistakes? In a sense, a battle was not about how well you performed, but who made fewer mistakes. The Yang spirit had the ability to tolerate mistakes, but other supremes did not. This was the key. How much more time would it take to find the python's weakness? During this period of time, Lytic Khan was also looking for Lu Xiaoyi's weakness and trying out his own tactical combination. How could you underestimate the attacking and coordinating ability of a top-level Yang spirit who had been around for thousands of years? Right now, Lu Xiaoyi's greatest guarantee of safety was his strange and unpredictable ability to move freely. However, every swordsman knew that moving freely to ensure one's safety would never be 100% effective. Jumping was a trick to achieve complete defense through movement, and because of this, it could not protect you forever. There would always be mistakes. There would always be accidents. There would always be some bad luck. There would always be times when the opponent was lucky. How to solve it? In the next moment, Lu Xiaoyi gave them a completely unexpected answer. In the midst of constant jumping, he suddenly disappeared. This had often happened before. With the help of the sword puppet, the cover of the sword river, and the instantaneous acceleration and change of direction, he would often disappear in a short period of time. But this time it was different. The power of the sword river had greatly increased. This could only be done under the premise of letting go and not worrying about anything. The question was, how could he solve the problem of his own safety? The attack power of the flying sword suddenly increased. But this was not the most important thing. The most important thing was that they could not see Lu Xiaoyi. After a few breaths, he might appear in a certain direction and then inexplicably disappear. He came in a hurry and left in a hurry. After a few breaths of time, they understood that this person was actually traveling through space. Moreover, there was no sign, no preparation, and he was just doing it as he pleased. How did he do it? Most true monarchs were able to escape into extra-dimensional spaces. Those who were good at this could even compress the process into a very short period of time. As long as they could buy themselves a few breaths of time through some kind of tactical arrangement, they would be able to escape into an extra-dimensional space and disappear without a trace. If you could catch up, it would be another chase. However, no one could travel freely in a battle without causing any abnormal spatial fluctuations under the pressure of the opponent's attacks. It was like walking from one room to another in a big house, from the living room to the bedroom, and then from the kitchen back to the living room after a while. This was a new topic, and Litikon had long heard of it. It seemed that there was such a celestial phenomenon in a distant realm that could allow one to enter and exit extra-dimensional spaces purely based on the change in speed. Without any warning, he did whatever he wanted. If he wanted to come out, he would come out. If he did not want to come out, he would not come out. There was no way to determine where he would come out. There was no blind spot, and there was no way to guess. This was not the worst part. The worst part was that although this person had gone to the extra-dimensional space, he had left his flying sword behind. Without the restrictions and scruples of a cultivator's body, he did not have to consider the problem of self-defense. Therefore, he could really do whatever he wanted. Just this point alone had caused the python to suffer much more damage than before. In the previous test, Lu Xiaoyi had already found out what kind of Dao realm was the most harmful to the python. Since it was the power of a god, other Dao realms would not have any effect on it. There is only one Dao realm that could have a profound effect on the python's recovery. In other words, as long as he slashed fast enough, the python's body would not be able to recover due to the obstruction of the power of merit. The python finally began to drip with blood. Its skin and flesh were torn apart, and several parts of its body could not be mended in a short period of time. Litikon found himself in a very awkward situation. He was indeed in the middle of a battle. His opponent's flying sword covered the sky and earth, but he could not find his opponent. It was as if he was fighting against the void. He could only take a beating, but he could not fight back because his opponent was not in the same space as him. As a yang spirit, of course, he also had the ability to travel through extra-dimensional spaces. With the help of the wings of cloud, he could even go to at least 20 extra-dimensional spaces. However, this ability could not help him now, because he did not have time to use his spatial ability. The Sword River was like countless rats, endlessly biting, gnawing, drilling, and making holes on its huge body. There was no end to it. Back then, the fearless form of the huge python had brought him a lot of convenience, but now it had brought him a lot of trouble. A huge body could compress the space of his opponent, but without an opponent, he would be a huge target, tens of thousands of miles long. How could he hide? Moreover, there was another problem that couldn't be solved. Space travel was very dependent on the size of the target. The energy required to pass through a person and a group of people was on a completely different level. If he wanted to pass through the corpse of a huge python that was now the size of an asteroid, it would simply be an unimaginable thing. The desperate situation actually happened to the Yang spirit, which made the onlookers feel a little incredulous. How did he fight? What kind of escape is this? A cultivator at the stage of supremacy can freely travel through various extra-dimensional spaces? Is this Xuanyuan's skill? I just want to ask, is your Xianyuan still accepting people? Do you want older people? Rector Zhao was a little indiscriminate. When he was pressed to the ground by Lu Xiaoyi, he only felt the violence, but he really did not feel the wonder of the world of swordsmanship, so he had always been unconvinced. He thought that if his cultivation was higher, or if a few of his senior brothers came, he would not be able to do it. Now, he understood that it was useless no matter who came. The sword pagoda that had dealt with the thunder had made his heart itch. Then, there was the unconstrained sword river-crossing body that had killed Liticon. Now, it was even more amazing. It had opened a new chapter of the sword veins, sword control. As swordsmen, no one knew the importance of this sword control better than the two of them. This was epic-making, it subverted common sense, and it was also completely unsolvable. It was like giving a fish an extra pair of legs, giving a tiger a pair of wings, and giving a man an extra object. If he had this kind of escapability, who would want to get close to him? He could just beat them up all the way, and there would be no hidden dangers. Ever since he came to the main world, he had come into contact with a few swordsmen, including this Guang Yao in front of him. His overall impression of him was that he followed the rules, and it was in line with his conjecture of the main world sword vein. However, this Lu Xiaoyi showed something that was completely different from a normal swordsman. He finally understood that this was not something that belonged to Xian Yuan, but a personal thing. Swordsman, after all, was an orthodoxy that worshipped personal strength. Chapter 1653. Brilliant Light was dazzled by the scene. He was overjoyed because not only did Xian Yuan produce a peerless character, they even produced a peerless escape technique. Everyone paled in fright when they saw the technique. The only thing that worried him was that the requirements for this technique wouldn't be too strict, right? Hopefully, it was a technique that could be passed down and not something that only one person could learn by chance. This wasn't a rare occurrence in the history of the sword vein. Fortuitous opportunities were also divided into individual and group inheritances. My Xian Yuan doesn't accept people of dubious origins. You'd better make up a better story about yourself before you talk to me. Rector Back glared at him. What was he thinking? Wasn't he defeated by me? If I don't want to be Xuan Yuan's disciple, wouldn't it be the same? He knew that it would be difficult for him to cross paths with Xian Yuan. What good would it be if he destroyed a primordial spirit with a bright future? There were no new changes in the battlefield. Actually, it had only been a few dozen breaths since Lu Xiaoyi used the spatial escape technique. The python was so huge that even if it stood there motionless, it would still take some time to chop it down. This was the benefit of having a huge body. The two pieces of trash were just watching the show. Only Lidic, who was in the middle of the battle, could truly feel the changes in the flying sword. He could clearly see that the swordsman's spatial escape and spatial kill were not untraceable. They had their own rules. In these few dozen breaths, the swordsman had entered and exited the spatial dimension 7 times. The shortest time he entered was 2 breaths, and the longest time was 6 breaths. He knew very well that the swordsman was doing this on purpose so that there wouldn't be any rules. Why do you have to enter and exit so frequently? Couldn't he just stay in the spatial dimension and release his flying sword? He could also see that the swordsman had a reason to come out. If he didn't come out, he wouldn't be able to maintain the strength of his flying sword. The effect of the swordsman releasing his flying sword in the origin world and the spatial dimension was different. Sending a flying sword through the dimensional space to kill him would be weakened. Therefore, a swordsman's attack was actually a hybrid type of attack. With the swords released in the main world as the main body, and the flying swords released from the dimensional space as the supplement, it formed a set of attacks that looked no different from a normal state. However, the truth was that there was a difference between the two types of attacks. The flying swords released in the origin world were the most powerful, but as time passed, their power would quickly decrease, and their numbers would also decrease because they had to stab him. This time would not exceed 6 or 7 breaths. In other words, if the swordsman wanted to maintain this level of attack, he would have to come out of the dimensional space, release his sword, and then run back into the dimensional space. This was the secret behind the swordsman's attack style. The problem was that even though he knew the secret behind the swordsman's attack, he didn't have a perfect way to counter it. The perfect way to counter it was to counter it without taking any risks. There was no such method. He still had to take the risk. The way to take the risk was to enter Meho Roja's final form, the chaotic form. He had to wait for the swordsman to reappear in the origin world. This was a battle of wits and courage. Temporary gains and losses didn't mean anything. The one who had the last laugh was the true winner. There were plenty of examples of people who had been suppressing their opponents throughout the battle, but in the end, they were defeated by their opponents who had been struggling bitterly. He had experienced it too many times. He had to be patient, he warned himself. This was a very scary opponent, even scarier than many of the sun gods he had met. He rarely felt the threat of death when fighting against other sun gods, but in front of this god swordsman, he truly felt it. He didn't wait for the swordsman to come out. Just when he thought the swordsman was about to come out and the swords were about to run out, the swordsman uncharacteristically made a big move. This was truly an extraordinary battle. Who was the one who extinguished the lights? Countless stars in the surrounding starry sky suddenly extinguished and lit up again. At this moment, all of the sword lights seemed to be reborn from blood, erupting with a power that was several times stronger than normal, cutting the already riddled python into countless pieces. This time, the python's body could no longer recover, collapsing and disappearing in the void. Once again, the two cripples on the side had a taste of the power of a divine bull. Lidicon was reborn again, still as a python. Just when the python's body was expanding, Lu Xiaoyi leaped out of the origin world and began to hit him while he was down. This was an inevitable choice. He had already beheaded his opponent twice, and whether it was from a technique or mentality, there was no reason to let him go so easily. He had to be ruthless when he needed to be, so he wouldn't let the situation he had fought so hard for go to waste. At this moment, the seemingly expanding python suddenly exploded, and countless profound and ancient auras spread out, covering the space within a radius of 100,000 miles. Lu Xiaoyi, who had just come out of the origin world, was caught right in the middle. Since he didn't know where Lidicon would come from, it was normal to use an area of effect forbidden technique. However, Lidicon's chaotic form wasn't a forbidden technique, but a technique that could replace him with his own life. Meiho Luojia's third form wasn't actually a battle form. Its significance lay in the upper realm, the breakthrough to the half-immortal level. It belonged to the category of pure cultivation. Cultivators could cultivate it after reaching the sun god level, and then gradually perfect their chaotic form. When the chaotic form was completed, it meant that they had become a half-immortal. Therefore, no matter who cultivated it at the monarch level, it would only be a half-completed chaotic form. However, how could things be so clearly separated in the cultivation world? Although the chaotic state was not a combat form, it was undeniable that its level was still above the balanced state and the fearless state. It also had all kinds of magical uses of this form. It was very magical. It was a kind of virtual thing that was even more structured at the level of Yang's spirit. For example, the space covered by this chaotic form was the chaotic state when the universe was first born after the five ties. At that time, the innate Daos were still incomplete. Time had just started to appear, and space had yet to take shape. In other words, in this chaotic form, there was no distinction between space and time. Of course, there was no origin world. The entire universe was a complete space, the only space. Later on, there would be all kinds of changes in the innate Daos, and that was the true subdivision of the universe. The only reason Lidicon used the chaotic form in this place was that no one could use the power of space. No one could find the entrance to the origin world because theoretically, there wasn't a second space here. As for Lidicon, he had already turned into the chaotic form in this place. He had no physical form, no likes or dislikes, nothing. He was the chaotic form, and the chaotic form was him. This was his ultimate counterattack. He entered the chaotic form, then used the killing of the three swordsmen to take the next step and break through to the half-immortal level. There was no waist drum, no drumstick, and no practical way to attack. It was a perfect understanding of the chaotic form. Then, with this perfect understanding, he would completely turn this area into a chaotic void. Then, he would take the next step and form the clear and turbid chi. The three swordsmen were the best nourishment for the clear and turbid chi. Chapter 1654. P.S. On the Chidian app, there's a link to the 2020 Best Author of the Year. Well, Old Fallen is definitely not the winner, but if he's at the end, he'll look worse. There are only a few votes, but it's better than nothing. It doesn't cost any money, just a few seconds of your time. Thank you for your support. The event lasts for a week. If you poke it for a week, you shouldn't be tired. Please. The two cripples were among them. Because they were too engrossed in watching, and because they didn't really care about their current state, they forgot to maintain a safe distance. So when Ridichin's chaos form appeared, the two of them were like meat buns hitting a dog. Ridichin didn't have a good impression of the two. As long as they were swordsmen, he didn't mind taking them away. We have to return. Backtree was very melancholic. You say it as if you don't have to return. No matter who wins this time, your outcome will be the same. Light Illumination said disdainfully. Backtree looked left and right, but he didn't really care. His future was as bleak as Light Illumination's. For proud people like them, it was time for them to end their own lives after watching this show. So now that they were pulled into the chaos realm, it was like adding mud to their pants that were already full of shit. Why would they care? Then, the two of them began to analyze the process of returning. Live and learn. And even death couldn't stop their curiosity and thirst for knowledge. When the chaos is formed and the universe is first separated, the clear air rises and the turbid air falls. Thus there is heaven and earth. I wonder if you and I will have clear or turbid air when the time comes. Backtree wasn't a talkative person, but at the end of his life, he spoke more, as if to make up for some regret. Light Illumination said, "This person is trying to break through, so he will turn everything in this void into chaos, including you and me, and also junior brother Little E. We can't see him, but we can feel him because he is the chaos that is everywhere." This is a true confrontation of the Tao realm. The understanding of the Tao realm in Hung River orthodoxy isn't much in the main world. If we were Dharma cultivators, he wouldn't do this. But we are swordsmen. Backtree laughed. Yes. I've never heard of any swordsman in the cultivation world who can cultivate the 5 ties. Even chaos is rare. Therefore, he had nothing to fear. He has grasped the sword vein's weakness. Brilliant Light was not convinced. Even if you don't understand, you can still struggle. Could it be that he was going to surrender, just like that? Let's not talk about stopping him. Even if he spends a bit more effort to buy us some time, that would be good enough. Chu Chung was speechless. Why are you struggling? Don't talk about the 5 ties. I think you don't know anything about Hundun either. Other than the ability to kill, what else do you know? Luminous Light snorted. As long as you struggle, there will be meaning. Because my junior brother is still here. This was because there was still the possibility of someone passing by and interfering with it from the outside. Because there might be an outbreak of celestial phenomena. Because of the possibility of void beasts breaking in. When these accidents happen and you realize that you didn't do anything because you were disheartened, that's the stupidest thing. Back Puppet was stunned for a moment before it clasped its hands and said, "You're right. We swordsmen will never allow ourselves to be captured. It's one thing to want to die, but it's another thing if someone wants to kill us." The two of them wanted to share some of the pressure on Lu Xiaoyi, even if it was insignificant. Thus, they began to discuss how to resist the erosion of Hundun. The two of them were not proficient in the basic theoretical research of the 5 ties and Hundun. However, even if they were not proficient in it, they were still primordial soul perfected lords. With their realms, they would still be able to comprehend some things by analogy. They would not be blind. Even if they could not resist systematically, they could still blindly stir things up. Lu Xiaoyi knew that he had been tricked. However, this kind of trick was hard to avoid. It was not a problem of fighting, but a problem of cultivation structure. If Ridicon had used this trick on him from the beginning, he would not have been able to avoid it. However, he was forced to do so now. In this sense, his battle was still valuable. At the very least, he had seen the two rebirths of the Hengi Yang god. From this, he could deduce many things. In the eyes of the two useless people, reincarnation was completely meaningless. However, in his eyes, he could see more. This was because he understood the Hengi Yang god better. He had even fought with one of the Hengi Yang gods before. He had his own unique perspective on the past of the people of Hengi Yang god. In the eyes of bright light and backlight, there were nearly 100 pieces of history that were messy. However, in his eyes, there were clues to be found. This included the various bases of judgment of the ancestors in the Sword Tao tablet, including his own very rich and complicated past. In fact, he already had a basic judgment. He could totally try to kill it. However, he did not expect that when he was ready, the other party had already turned into Hundun. If even the person turned into Hundun, where could he slash? Next, it was not a problem that could be solved with a sword. When his consciousness was placed in Hundun, he quickly understood his situation. He was different from the two useless people. This was because he originally had the foundation of the small universe when he was in the nascent soul stage. He had the foundation of various connate great Taos. For hundreds of years, he had been deeply immersed in the theory of the five ties and Hundun. He was deeply immersed in this aspect. In addition, he had the countless genius ideas of the cultivators of the big fruit plate. He could also be considered a master in this aspect. However, he could not verify how great he was through the fragments. Perhaps it was just bad luck that he had not encountered it, or was it that he had encountered it, but could not sense it? This place had become his new battlefield. He was full of confidence in this. Hundun was also known as Hundun. It referred to the misty state where chi, form, and substance were one without separation before the universe was formed. It was a stage in the concept of time and space in the cultivation world. It was after the fourth Tai Su of the connate five tais. Tai Yi, Tai Chu, Tai Shi, Tai Su, Hundun, Tai Chi, heaven and earth, all things. From a silent Tai Yi to Tai Shi, it was a process from formless to corporeal. Tai Chu was the beginning of Qi. It was only at the stage of Tai Shi that it became visible. Change of form and have substance. This is the essence of Tai Su. Qi, form, and substance were one without separation. This was Hundun. Hundun was a unified state that had not been separated. It was also known as One, which was also Tai Chi. From Tai Chi, One was divided into two. The clear and light One was the heaven above, and the turbid One was the earth below. Then the heaven and earth gave birth to man and all things. Lidik Khan wanted to achieve his goal of reaching the upper realm in this chaotic space and also wanted to destroy them. In fact, what he wanted to rely on was this process of separating the clear and the turbid. If he succeeded, the three unlucky fellows would become the clear and turbid Qi and return to their respective positions. They would also become the stepping stones of the Hengi half immortal. If he failed, Lu Xiaoyi could not see clearly for the time being. Would it be that he did not need to kill the three lives Hengi Yang God, and it would automatically perish? Or would he need to intervene? These things could only follow his feelings. There were no precedents to refer to. The first thing he had to face now was the omnipresent chaos in the surrounding space that was squeezing him, assimilating him, and melting him, because he was the only impurity in this chaos. At this time, he still did not know that the two cripples had also been involved. In fact, even if he knew, it would be meaningless. He could not even protect himself, and it was impossible for him to help others first. In this kind of contest of life and death, he had walked out. In fact, everyone had walked out. Chapter 1655. There were two ways to break Lidik Khan's Tao realm kill. The first was to go against the flow. For example, the chaos he was in was dissolving everything within and then developing in the direction of clear and turbid Qi. Then, all he needed to do was to push back the chaos and push the state of this place towards essence. Once the state of this place was no longer chaos but Tai Su, it meant that Meho Roha's final form had failed, and Lidik Khan's cultivation had failed. The other was to go with the flow, not obstructing the change of the chaos, but controlling the change of the chaos in his own hands. In other words, he would turn the chaos here into his own chaos and achieve his own Tao realm. He would strip the people of Hung River naked and end up working for someone else. Lu Xiaoyi chose the latter. This was because of his personality. A thief never leaves empty-handed. This was his philosophy all along. Therefore, he sat cross-legged in the air and completely let go of himself. He took the initiative to merge into the chaos and immediately discovered the existence of two unlucky people. He couldn't be bothered to care about them. Here, he had to thank those research-type cultivators of the big fruit platter. Countless spiritual gatherings and all kinds of strange ideas had truly brought out the wisdom of humans to the extreme. It also gave him more than one method. It was a whimsical product of many shut-in cultivators. Now that he used it here, it was enough to make the people of Hung River suffer. He wasn't fighting alone. He had a solid theoretical foundation behind him. In his opinion, in such a contest, the people of Hung River wouldn't be a match for him with their not-so-outstanding Tao realm knowledge, right? After all, only the mainstream orthodox Taoists would study these things, and Hung River had long deviated from the mainstream direction. They were more inclined towards those mysterious paths. But when he really immersed himself in it, he realized that something was wrong. This wasn't the true Tao realm of chaos. It was the fusion of Hung River's Tao realm and the Tao realm of chaos. It was the mutated Tao of chaos. Moreover, he wasn't sure if the clear and turbid Qi would really form heaven and earth after separating. Maybe it would form Lin Jiaxiang and Saint's Cave. When he thought of this, he couldn't help but feel a chill. He couldn't lose this battle. Otherwise, he would be letting down his ancestors. Facing Li Taikan's invasion of the chaos, Jihao had the upper hand. But facing Meiho Roha's divine power, Jihao unsurprisingly fell into a disadvantage. First of all, Jihao didn't know much about this divine power. And second of all, the divine power of Hung River system was especially great. With his true power as a dark spirit, it was way too difficult for Jihao to completely overturn this divine power. Lu Xiaoyi couldn't overturn the power of Moho Roha's divine head, while Riddich Khan couldn't do anything to this swordsman's pure chaos Tao. After all, it was the purest great Tao in the world. However, Lu Xiaoyi knew that if this continued, without the help of external forces, he would definitely lose. This was because his cultivation level determined his foundation. If this continued for a long time, the only one who could not hold on was his Yin spirit, not his Yang spirit. Where could the external force come from? Expecting someone to pass by? First of all, this was an extremely low probability. This region was a barren land in history, and no fragments had ever appeared. At such a critical moment, who would come here? Expecting a natural phenomenon? That would be the heavenly Tao opening its eyes. Moreover, this region was empty, and there didn't seem to be any unstable natural phenomena. Expecting a few isolated planets nearby, they were all in the most stable period. If this continued, it would be enough to exhaust an immortal to death. The only glimmer of hope was those two trash. That was if they were willing to sacrifice themselves. Lu Xiaoyi was very clear about their mentality. They were unwilling to be ordinary and wanted to end their own lives. As long as Lu Xiaoyi asked, they would definitely do it. If Jihao taught them some tricks and used the lives of true lords as the price, they would have a chance to try. However, this thought only flashed through his mind and disappeared in an instant. He wasn't such a person. Even if he won, even if his sect didn't blame him, even if the sword tomb didn't pursue the matter, he wouldn't be able to overcome the hurdle in his heart. He would rather rely on his own strength, regardless of the outcome. People had to have a bottom line and persevere, even if they were a little foolish at times. There is also another way to improve his understanding of the 5 grand essences and chaos. However, how could this be done quickly? Digging out his potential and working hard to refine and deepen what he had learned from the fruit platter was his only way to win. This battle was troublesome. Burned firewood flew alone in the void. He couldn't say that he had a huge demand for these fragments, but it was necessary to do something. This was a concept that cultivators had to have. If you didn't fight for anything, the heavenly Tao's attention would shift away from you. This was because you didn't need it and didn't care. He deliberately avoided the large areas where the anchor chain cultivators were more concentrated. They were landlords, and they were here as ambassadors to build relationships. When fighting for food, they had to pay attention to their table manners. They had to take it easy. Since they had to fight when they saw the fragments, they could only fly to a place with fewer people. They hoped that if they really encountered the fragments, they would be able to withdraw quickly and avoid conflict. They all had the same thought, so they ran to an open area. They wanted to try their luck. There wasn't much difference between popular and non-popular places. They had been out for half a month, so it wasn't strange that they hadn't seen anything. He had a good mentality. He held on to the idea that there was nothing to be gained. This kind of mentality was most suitable for cultivation. For orthodox Taoists like them, they had a good grasp of propriety. Just as he was wandering around leisurely, a faint light appeared in front of him. Burned firewood's heart skipped a beat. For someone like him who had a supreme background, he could clearly tell that this was a chaos fragment. He didn't expect to be so lucky. He knew that he couldn't startle it, so he slowly approached it. This chaos fragment wasn't fast. It was just at the speed of cruising the universe. It floated aimlessly. Burned firewood slowly approached from the side, trying his best to control his aura. Just as he was about to enter the range where he could attempt to communicate with it, the chaos fragment suddenly trembled. The next moment, it flashed away. It was so fast that even an essence soul like him couldn't catch up. After chasing it for a while, he had to give up. At this speed, there was no way he could catch up. This was the true essence of a universe's void. It was something close to the Tao. If it wanted to leave, who could stop it? Burned firewood was a little depressed. It was fine if he didn't see it. Out of sight, out of mind. However, he couldn't understand why it suddenly ran away when he saw it. It shouldn't be. Chapter 1656. Shard of the Great Path would not hide from people. If that was the case, who could catch them? At the very least, cultivators had a chance to get close to them. At most, they would run away if they could not communicate well or if they used brute force. It was because of this that burning firewood could not understand why it ran away. He had not communicated with it. Moreover, the direction the chaos shard left in was very strange. If it really wanted to avoid him, it should have gone in the opposite direction, but it ran to the side. He took out the star map and compared it to the direction the shard escaped in, but he did not find anything special. In this direction, there were many large and small celestial phenomena, each with their own characteristics, including the no man's land. Did I scare it? Or is there something attracting it? Burning firewood shook his head and was too lazy to think about it. If it was not his, it was useless to force it. Qian was fighting with someone. It was not just one person, but a chaotic battle between several people. It involved several realms of the anchor chain. He was here to help because he did not know much about the 5 Grandmasters in Chaos. However, he did not know much about them, but some of his senior brothers were good at this, so he came to help. A Taisu shard was seen by several groups of people. Needless to say, it was a battle of fists and feet. This was the eternal melody of the cultivation world. Qian did not even see the real thing. Because he did not know Taisu, he naturally could not see that this little thing was just a fighter. It was for a strange shard. As they fought, several groups of people suddenly flew in the same direction. Qian did not know what was going on and was still entangled with the opponents in front of him. The perfected Lord Vo was so angry that he scolded, "You idiot! The thing is running away, and you still want to fight?" Qian was a little confused. Running away? Then why didn't you chase it? Perfected Lord Vo said fiercely, "You guys can't do anything right. It was such a good treasure, yet they had to fight for it. Now it was all for naught. Chase. How? The Great Path ran away. Can you catch it? Do you think you were chasing a wife?" The group of people looked at the shard and sighed. No one chased it because they had experience in this matter. Every time a shard of the great path fell, as long as they were startled and ran, they would not stop for several years. With the shard's terrifying speed, where could they find it? Giving up was the wisest choice. Several groups of people grumbled, but there was nothing they could do. After all, the space belonged to everyone, and not just anyone's private plot of land. Why couldn't others have access to it? He could only blame himself for being unlucky. It wasn't as if he hadn't encountered such a situation in the past, but it ended up scaring the shard away because of a fight. Since he had already made a move, how could he control his strength? Those who could see the shards were still fine. They were very careful when they made their moves, afraid that they would startle the shards. However, among the cultivators who were fighting in groups, there were a few who couldn't see the shards at all. It was very likely that they would startle the shards when they made their moves. He was already depressed before the river, so why bother? He came out to help, but he still ended up being blamed. If he had known earlier, he would have followed senior brother Lu. With him around, who could snatch it from him? Lu Xiaoyi was still holding on. More than 10 days had passed. Although the two sides were still in a stalemate and there was no clear trend of victory or defeat, he could already feel that he was in a disadvantageous position. Although it was very small, it was a sign of danger. In the long run, the disadvantageous position would become bigger and bigger until he couldn't struggle anymore. In the end, he would become Lin Jiaxiang. He still didn't want to sacrifice light and back. He didn't even want to think about it. Ever since he lost senior Marshal Brother Guangbei in the Wolf Ridge when he was building his foundation, he understood what a true sword cultivator was. There were some bottom lines that couldn't be crossed. If he crossed them once, it would become logical in the future. He wouldn't be himself anymore, and he wouldn't even be as reckless as that guy in the sword tomb. Meiho Luojia's power seemed to be endless. This was the benefit of worshipping a god. One might fall into blind worship and lose one's understanding of the great Tao, but this thing was really useful. It was real and could be used. It wasn't like those Taoist things which were shrouded in fog and had to be understood by oneself. Taoist things took a lot of effort so they could reach a higher level. Hung He's system was more practical, but its future achievements would be limited. This was the great Tao. Balance was everywhere. His current problem was that the great Tao had balanced everything out. His understanding of the great Tao couldn't be compared with the Hung He people's direct use of power. By now, he had stopped thinking about how to turn the situation around. He started thinking about a life-and-death struggle. Even if I die, I will break 2 of your teeth. He needed to make a good plan. He needed to go through all his cards and figure out how to break more of Hung He people's teeth. It would be best if he could destroy his path to the upper level. When he decided to fight with his own life, he wouldn't hide it from those 2 anymore. The 3 of them would have a greater chance. This was his way of doing things. He didn't want others to die for him, but when he went to seek death himself, he would bring 2 people with him. This was a must. If he failed, those 2 wouldn't be able to survive either. In this case, why didn't the 3 of them fight with their lives? However, he still needed to wait for a while. When he finished the plan, he would tell them at the last moment, so that they wouldn't have to listen to a bunch of bullsh*t. So be it. He liked straightforward things and didn't like long-winded bitter dramas. Fighting with one's life was a technical job. It wasn't something that could be done by clenching one's teeth and fighting with one's blood. It was a well-planned tactical arrangement. However, in such a tactical arrangement, he didn't need to consider his own safety. He might even sacrifice his own life to achieve a certain effect. Under normal circumstances, fighting with one's life wasn't difficult for him. However, the current environment wasn't normal. He was in someone else's territory. When fighting against Meiho Roja's power, there were many uncertainties that he needed to consider and make a choice. He still knew too little about Hung He's system. What he knew was mostly about the few main gods. However, there were so many fart gods in Hung He's system that even local people might not know all of them, not to mention him, who didn't belong to this world at all. While Lu Xiaoyi was carefully preparing, a slight change occurred. He raised his head confusedly. Was he not sure? Was it an outsider? Not likely. Normal monarchs couldn't break in, and no monarch would be so stupid as to break in, knowing full well that it was a death trap. The aura seemed strange. It didn't seem human, but it had perfectly merged with the chaos space. If he didn't have a great sense of Tao, he wouldn't even be able to find it. In the next moment, Lu Xiaoyi curved his mouth corners in a grin. Holy **T. The heavens didn't destroy him. He wanted to sleep, but here came his pillow. Chapter 1657. A great Tao fragment had entered. A Grand Supreme fragment. Lu Xiaoyi easily guessed why it had come here. He had to thank the revered High Priest Liticon for this. Without his ultimate chaotic form, how could Lu Xiaoyi have such a chance? He had not encountered a fragment for several hundred years. This was a simple principle. Wealth came from danger. As he slowly moved toward the fragment, Lu Xiaoyi was not worried that someone would snatch it from him. The people outside could not enter, and the two cripples could not see it. Liticon did not really need it. Perhaps he would fight with him, but the outcome of such a fight was already decided. Why Grand Supreme? He did not know either. There was no doubt that it would be helpful to his growth in the Tao realm, but it would be even better if it was chaos. He could not be picky. The heavens were not unkind to him, giving him a hand in the face of life and death. He could not ask for too much. He was satisfied because he could sense this Grand Supreme fragment. He knew that his understanding of the 5 Grand Taos had already reached a higher level. At the very least, he had obtained the recognition of the Great Tao. He had plenty of time, so he decided to use a more conventional method to collect this Grand Supreme fragment. He would not be like before, sweeping it into Sparrow Palace and slowly subduing it. In the past, he had plenty of time to slowly train it, but what he needed now was a thorough understanding. He could not act like before. This was the last chance that the heavens had given him. He had to grasp it carefully and not be rash. The heavenly Tao would not give a second chance to those who did not cherish it. Grand simplicity, grand beginning, grand supreme, grand simplicity, grand ultimate. Now, there was a grand supreme in the middle. It was somewhat troublesome. He slowly extended his mental feelers. He was very experienced in interacting with this little thing and knew that he could not rush things. The principle of contact from the beginning was to not touch its core and not alarm it. Of course, he also had a backup plan. If it really wanted to run, his Sparrow Palace could send it over at any time, making it impossible for it to escape. The situation was not bad. Although the fragment was somewhat wary and felt that this person was putting on airs and harboring ill intentions, it was not to the point of running away. It stayed where it was and watched his performance. Lu Xiaoyi's coaxing and pestering was actually to express that he had no malicious intentions. After a period of time, when he felt that the time was ripe, Lu Xiaoyi was ready to throw out his views on the Great Path, hoping to get the fragment's approval. This was a very important step. Only when both sides reached a partial agreement in their understanding of Genesis Supreme would the fragment willingly follow the human cultivator. This process was like a marriage proposal. One would have to kneel down to express one's attitude, hand over the ring, and then say a bunch of sweet nothings to see if they had anything in common. Just when Lu Xiaoyi was about to get to the main point, he sensed something else. This time, due to his previous experience, he knew that another fragment of the ways had barged in. Moreover, it had sensed the existence of the Grand Prime fragment, so it had made its way here. It was an absolute beginning fragment. The two fragments had successfully joined forces. Because they were of the same origin, they were closer to each other. As they intertwined with each other, they galloped happily. Lu Xiaoyi was not in a hurry to collect it now, because he had already seen clearly that Liticon's chaotic state had an extraordinary attraction to the 5th Grand Prime fragment within a certain range. Since there were already 2 fragments of the ways of the Great Path, there was naturally the possibility of a 3rd or 4th fragment appearing, until the 5th Grand Prime was reunited. The most anticipated thing was, would it attract a fragment of the Grand Simplicity fragment that had already collapsed hundreds of years ago? As the two fragments flew up and down, they naturally evolved the true essence of the Tao. After Grand Primordial was Grand Supreme, and before Grand Primordial was Grand Primordial. The Tao realms between them were very closely connected, connecting the previous and the following, continuing and merging. While waiting, Lu Xiaoyi also joined in their dance, pretending to be Grand Simplicity and Essence Supreme. He was not a fragment of the ways of the Great Path, so there was definitely a gap in knowledge between the two fragments. Thus, he was often despised by the two fragments, and was always the one that was dealt with together. The most important thing was the attitude. Although the two fragments did not agree with his shallow knowledge, they did not reject such a shameless and pestering fellow. They could feel the attitude of a living being towards a great path. No matter if his knowledge was right or wrong, deep or shallow, the most important thing was his persistence towards the exploration of the great path. Slowly, they accepted him. However, they would never accept Lidic Khan's hand of friendship, because as the purest Tao concept, they would never accept a so-called God, no matter who he was. There was no coexistence. Innate Taos would never compromise on this point. Slowly, there were new members dancing in the space. Tai Chi, Essence Supreme, and the Chaos Fragment entered one after another and joined them. The dance turned into a group dance. Lu Xiaoyi could only pretend to be Grand Simplicity now. This was also the one that he had spent the longest time on and the one that he had the deepest understanding of. Even so, the group dance was very uncoordinated. Because there was an existence that could never hit the dance spot, either stepping on Genesis Supreme's foot or hitting Chaos Waste. He had no choice but to accept everyone's criticism. All kinds of criticism. All kinds of criticism. But Lu Xiaoyi's attitude was good. He nodded and bowed, accepted with an open mind, and turned over a new leaf. This made it difficult for these Tao seeds to kick such an existence out. In the end, the group dance finally became something, and he was finally considered to have truly integrated into it. After the 5 Tao fragments acknowledged him, the fragments also discovered his problem and began to take the initiative to help him solve the problem of resisting the godly power. Lu Xiaoyi declined. To a cultivator, what kind of character was the most important in the process of cultivation? Was it contentment or greed? Was it to leave a line for the heavens and stop while he was ahead? Or was it to be unforgiving and want to eat a fatty in one bite? Actually, there was no conclusion. It depended on the environment, the situation, and luck. On this point, Lu Xiaoyi was more inclined to the mentality of a gambler. When luck came, if you were not greedy, then when would you be able to turn over a new leaf? He had lost half his life in the gambling den, and now that he finally had a chance to win, if he did not raise his stakes, he would not be able to live up to his identity as a gambler. Therefore, he was not in a hurry to accept the help of the fragments, waiting for Grand Simplicity's arrival. A family had to be reunited. It did not make sense that everyone was here, but only Grand Simplicity had not arrived. If he won, he had to win to his heart's content. He had to achieve the result of the sun god lying down and Lu Xiaoyi eating his fill. Only then would he be in a good mood and have a clear mind. Happiness that was not built on the pain of others was not true happiness. A swordsman had to look like a sword. Therefore, even if the pressure of Lidic Khan's godly power was getting stronger and stronger, to the point where he could not bear it, he would bet on his luck and wait for Grand Simplicity's arrival. Chapter 1658. Lidic Khan had transformed into Meho Roha's ultimate chaotic state. When he was in this state, all the grudges of the mortal world had already left him. As long as he still had these thoughts, his chaotic state would never be perfect. This was the basic principle. How could the upper realm be thinking about those trivial matters? In his current chaotic state, he could clearly feel the threat from the great Tao fragment. But it was also an opportunity. In his current state, he was less sharp in battle, but more sensitive to the Tao. He knew that under such circumstances, he had to deal with this person as soon as possible. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. Fortunately, This person didn't have a Tao fragment yet. Was it a scheme? Or was it impossible? But his intuition told him that he was in danger. So he increased the pressure on the swordsman. What was supposed to be a surefire upper realm kill was now full of problems. This swordsman's ability to cause trouble was truly amazing. If he could go back to the past, if he could start all over again, he doubted if he would still choose to deal with this super troublesome guy. Under the increasing pressure, Lu Xiaoyi suddenly raised his head, and a smile appeared on his face. A fragment had intruded. Maybe it was a coincidence, or maybe it was the summon of a big family. But this Tai E fragment that had been drifting alone in the void of the universe for hundreds of years had finally returned. Finally, the whole family was gathered together. The cornerstone of the universe was also gathered. Lu Xiaoyi opened his heart, let go of his Niwen, and merged with the fragment. Lidikan was a little stunned, because a few more fragments had suddenly appeared in the space. Not only were they the cosmos' 5 manifestations and primal chaos, there seemed to be other Tao fragments as well. Impermanence? Void? Slaughter? And one of them was actually merit? Where did these things come from? What was even more terrifying was that these fragments kept coming in and out. Sometimes he could sense 10 fragments dancing outside, and sometimes he could only sense 3 or 4. Where did the rest go? Sometimes he couldn't even sense a single fragment. Where did they go? In his chaotic state, was there anywhere that could escape his senses? There was only one place, the Niwen Palace of a human cultivator, the sea of consciousness. Trouble. Danger. Big trouble. He had encountered a freak. Lu Xiaoyi felt satisfied as the fragments around him swam around happily, surrounding his little universe. And he was a fragment collector. Let me introduce them. They all have names. This is Little Void, this is Little Gong. You should also have names. Taichu, you can be called Little Rough, and Taisher, you can be called Little Wet. Everyone, take your positions. The time has come. I'm going to show my might. Fragment into Niwen, Universe Galaxy Transformation. After a short period of silence, a sudden change occurred. The entire chaotic form began to undergo mysterious changes. The clear and turbid chi, which had faintly taken shape, began to merge once again. The Tai Chi was no longer there, returning to the primal chaos. This was the reverse of history, but it was a reverse of the past. Under the pure power of the innate Tao, no one could stop it, not even the gods. But this wasn't the end. Following that, the primal chaos body began to melt. The grand essence that was originally transformed into a primal chaos state was now pushed out from the primal chaos state of Raja, Mo, throat god, to the grand essence state. In Lu Xiaoyi's sea of consciousness, the fragments were giving him pointers. Infinity is Tai Chi. Infinity Void Chi is the essence. Tai Chi Void Chi is the essence. Yin and Yang are separated into heaven and earth. Without the universe's Qi giving birth to form, there is already the universe's Qi. From form to Qi, it is called Yin and Yang. From Qi, it is called Tai. Qi Tai Qi Yuan Qi contains 3 as one, establishing the Tao of heaven, the Tao of earth, and the Tao of man. It is called the Tao of 3 talents. The movement of the 6 lines, the Tao of 3 extremes. This was the Tai Chi fragments competing. The chaotic one says that all things are chaotic, but not separated. See not, hear not, follow not, thus it is called E. Changeable is formless. Changeable is 1. 1 changeable is 7. 7 changeable is 9. 9 transformations, in the end, are repeated transformations into 1. First, the beginning of the transformation. The clear and light is heaven. The turbid chi is earth, and the harmonious chi is man. Thus, heaven and earth contain essence, and all things are born. This was the primal chaos being long-winded. Taisher, the form is instantaneous. Yin and Yang intersect, mixing into 1, giving birth to form from 1. Although it has form, it does not have substance. In the primal chaos of the fragments, the throat god of Raja Mo was changed into the Taishu state, followed by the Taichu state, and finally into the silent Tai E state. At this point, Ridichin's throat god of Raja Mo's form was pushed to the bottom. The form here had nothing to do with him, the initiator, and in this process, Ridichin could only watch helplessly. He did not have the ability to interfere at all. In the face of the purest Tao state power in the universe, any kind of divine power was useless. They were not on the same level. It was not over yet. After the reversal, the surrounding space went from Tai E to Taichu, Taishu, Taisu, Primal Chaos, and Tai Chi. Ridichin sadly realized that from the form, the clear and turbid Chi had finally taken form. However, this had nothing to do with him. This was someone else's clear and turbid Chi, not his. He was actually inexplicably eliminated in the process of his upper realm. It had nothing to do with him. It had become someone else's. The two useless people felled at the moment the throat god of Raja, Mo, started to reverse. This was intuition. It must be Junior Brother's doing. Oh no, it must be a counterattack. How can we help him? Back shouted. Light Illumination was much more clear-headed than him. Help? Do you have the ability? Just don't add more trouble to it. Let nature take its course. This is a good opportunity for us. If you don't know how to make use of it, why are you still cultivating? Why are you still practicing the sword? The two of them no longer resisted. Instead, they tried their best to integrate into the changes. They might not know the reason for doing so, but they did not lack the motivation to do so. Through the changes of the five ties, they changed their bodies. Even if it was passive, inexplicable, even if it became worse, how bad could it be compared to now? This was the change that Lu Xiaoyi was manipulating. It would definitely not harm them. This kind of mentality was the basic mentality of a primordial spirit cultivator. If they did not gamble now, when would they? Previously, they were a little desperate because they knew that there was no possibility of their bodies recovering completely. Now it was different, who did not have the desire to survive against the heavens. When their forms changed into the Tai state, the two of them almost turned into two balls of dead silence. However, they persevered through it. Thus, the bitter was over and the sweet was coming. It could not be said to be reborn, but it was an extremely important opportunity for their bodies to recover. Following the changes in their forms, they also became stronger and stronger. Slowly, they turned from useless people to slightly useful people. Then, they gradually began to recover their previous strength. If they could perfectly persevere to the end, it would be a leap to a new level for them. Chapter 1659. Lu Xiaoyi first removed its roots, then took its shape. With one reverse and one upright, he completely shattered the foundation of Hung, He-Man's upper realm. At this moment, he felt that he had reached a very important juncture. Nascent divinity was already within his reach. This was actually his main purpose. As the saying goes, strike while the iron is hot and finish everything in one go. Especially in the world of cultivation, when you feel it, you must not delay, hide, or study it. Then consider whether you have prepared enough. Do you have enough spiritual devices? Is the environment safe? When you have thought it through, you will miss the opportunity and your luck will be gone. What can you do? He had been waiting for these 6 great Daos for more than 500 years, but he never thought that he would get 6 great Daos. The 6 great Daos had arrived, and the great Daos had been delivered to his mouth. What could he do? When the final Tai Chi form was formed, the clear air was above, and the turbid air was below. The entire space had become his world. Only the consciousness of Lidik Khan, who was staring at him covetously and enviously, was still hiding in a corner. Lidik Khan's current state was one where he could neither ascend nor descend. He could only see the swordsman's big mouth in the middle. He couldn't go back. His Meho Rogia form was composed of 2 parts. The first part was Meho Rogia's divine power, and the other part was the chaos. But now, the chaos was taken away by someone else, turned over and over again, and suffered a great pain from the inside out. Therefore, The chaos was no longer his power. Because he had lost half of his form, only the divinity was left. He didn't dare to recklessly interfere, and he had to be careful even when he wanted to do something bad. He was afraid that this swordsman would take things too hard and stop ascending first. Instead, he would use him as an example. He could only endure, pretend to be docile, pretend to be scared, and wait for the chance to appear in the process of ascending. For a cultivator, destroying one's cultivation path was like killing one's parents. How could he forget? His only answer was to destroy this person's upper realm as well. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to dispel this person's hatred. Lu Xiaoyi's method of attaining nascent divinity was completely different from the Taoist methods. In fact, after he attained nascent soul, all of his upper realms were different. There were no precedents, no methods. If one didn't understand, one had to rely on words. If one understood, words wouldn't. This was the normal process of ascending, but now, he couldn't even rely on words. The only thing he could rely on was his deeper understanding of the universe. Although he could only do it himself, his goal was clear. Once the goal was set, it would be carried out immediately. He would not waste time killing Li Taikan at this time. Compared with his cultivation, Hengyang's spirit was nothing. Wills is nascent divinity form is. The divinities, nascent divinities, divinity, form divinity. Divinity. Simply put, when a cultivator perfectly combined his divinity with his body, he would reach the nascent divinity realm. From then on, the divinity he cultivated would be divinity yang. Lu Xiaoyi's divinity had been polished for a long time. In the Taoist cognition system, if the divinity wasn't strong enough, it wouldn't be strong enough after fusion. If the divinity was too full and the barrier was hard to break, it was very contradictory. Therefore, timing was very important. It didn't mean that the longer one stayed in the divinity realm, the more confident he would be in ascending to the next realm. There was a limit to this, but he didn't have to think about these problems because as a small universe, he had to follow the rhythm of the big universe. Therefore, he didn't have to worry about strengthening his divinity. He didn't care about the barrier. Anyway, everything could be decided by the changes of the small universe. If he wanted the divinity to merge with his body, he had to first teach the divinity the foundation of 3 souls and 7 spirits. There were 3 souls in Madame's body. One was fetus light, the qi of Tai Ching Yang. One was Shuang Ling, the qi of Yin. And one was Yu Jing, the qi of Yin. The first soul, fetus light, belonged to the heavens. It often wanted to be with the living to prolong one's life. It wanted to stay in a human body for a long time and was ready for Tao. The second soul, Shuang Ling, belonged to the 5 elements. It often wanted to control the human body and the myriad of things. It wanted to control the 100 gods and bring about many disasters. The third soul, Yu Jing, belonged to the earth. It often wanted people to be lustful and addicted to lust. It was filthy and dark, delaying sleep. Shuang Ling wanted people to be alive. Life made the heart tired. When the heart tired, it made the 100 gods work. When the 100 gods worked, the qi would disperse. The 3 souls are indeterminate. The refreshing spirit floats. The fetus light takes shape. The serene spirit calls. Hence the saying, Tai Wei Xian Palace, Yu Wang Shi Qing, refines the 3 souls. The fetus light is peaceful. The divine treasure jade room is born with me. Do not act rashly. The examiner is too smart if you want to fly. After refining the 3 souls, there were still the 7 spirits. The first spirit was named Corpse Dog. The second spirit was named Concealed Arrow. The third spirit was named Sparrowine. The fourth spirit was named Seizing Thief. The fifth spirit was named Non-Poison. The sixth spirit was named Filth Removal. The seventh spirit was named Smelly Lung. Lu Xiaoyi guarded his heart and focused on imparting his soul. All of this had its own little universe. For Ian, master of his level, it wasn't something that required much effort. He just had to follow the order and impart his soul. Finally, it was time for the spirits to enter the body. The sun scattered its splendor. The drooping purple and green light entered my soul, illuminating my 5 forms. But the ghost tested my heart. The heavenly light came and went. The 6 embryos were connected. The 3 souls guarded the spirit. The 7 spirits did not die, bearing the sun and crying, together with the sun god. The soul essence, the soul spirit, the 9 heavens were born together. The stones seemed jellyfish. The moon was bright, wandering the moon palace, smelting the golden court. The 2 scenes combined, the auspicious time was clear. The 8 meeting belt, I am willing to succeed. In this process, because of more than 500 years of continuous polishing, the Een Master was very tough. Hence, the spiritual opportunity required for imparting the spirits was unusually large. He could only use the purple purity. This kind of energy problem could not be solved easily. He was very rich. All these years, he only had income and no expenditure. But even so, he could not make ends meet. He felt powerless. He was not worried, because he was in the void, and because of the special characteristics of his little universe. He could capture the purple purity and jade purity in the surrounding space under special circumstances. This was the only ability of his little universe body. He could not abuse it. He could only try it when he was in the most difficult upper realm. The body of his little universe was useless? No, just this was the path of the infinite upper realm. How could there be a second cultivation technique in the world that could compare? Lytic Khan saw an opportunity. He was very clear that he, who had lost his body, could no longer perform any forbidden techniques to stop this swordsman. In the form of an incarnation, he had given up the means of a cultivator and entrusted everything to the essence of the great Tao. Therefore, he could not use the vision of a cultivator to destroy this. Without a body, all the skills he had learned were useless, just like how the swordsman's sword was useless here. Therefore, he could only watch and wait, hoping for an opportunity to use his divine power. Lu Xiaoyi's lack of strength was an opportunity. He wanted to use his little universe body to restrain the spiritual opportunity in the surrounding space. This was not in the category of the great Tao. Therefore, Meho Roha's divine power could stop him. Without the source of spiritual opportunity, let's see what he could use to reach the upper realm. He had to pay the price for strengthening his Een Master. Chapter 1660. The small universe revolved, but the spiritual opportunity did not arrive. Lu Xiaoyi felt danger. It went without saying who did it, and there was no other possibility. This guy was able to wait until now to make a move. He was very persistent, and the timing was really good. He had hit his sore spot. Energy was a hurdle that could never be bypassed in the upper realm. It was a cornerstone that could not be exploited, especially in the void of the universe. One could only die of thirst in the upper realm if one did not have the help of one's teacher or fellow disciples. As expected of a young god, he was steady, accurate, and ruthless. There was not much time left for Lu Xiaoyi. The spiritual energy in his storage ring was decreasing at a visible rate. What other source of spiritual energy did he have? The 2 swordsmen were a source, but they also used a lot of spiritual energy to repair themselves. It was completely unpredictable. The 2 of them were very far away from the Yang God realm, so it was impossible for them to prepare much. The key was that Lu Xiaoyi had an even more vicious idea. This chaotic form, well, it had now become a Tai Chi form. In fact, it was also a variation of energy. It was a part of Lytic Khan's huge energy. Since it was energy, of course it could be used, but it needed a certain amount of conversion. He was not unfamiliar with these methods, and there was a group of fragments giving him ideas. He completely cut off the idea of the Hengyi Yang God. As for what would happen to the people of Hengyi after swallowing this energy, only God knew. It was not something he should think about. Under the supply of a huge amount of energy, primordial chi was gradually born. When the primordial spirit was born, primordial chi was born. When the primordial spirit was born, primordial chi was born. When the primordial spirit was born, primordial chi was born. Primordial chi was a new term that could only be obtained after a cultivator reached the primordial spirit realm. However, there were also Taoist sects that regarded it as an upgraded, strengthened, and refined version of supernatural power. Everyone had their own opinions, but in any case, this was a new chapter. Lidik Khan's consciousness was silent in the depths of his mind. He was not moved by the loss of his chaotic energy body. It was not that he did not feel pity or heartache, but he knew that this kind of negative emotion was of no use to him now. He had long known that cutting off the cosmic spiritium around him would not have much of an effect, because his massive chaos form was right there, and there was no way his opponent could not see it. There were still some flaws in his research on this chaotic form. He originally thought that he could solve this flaw by killing the upper realm, but he didn't expect that he would end up in a dead end. For a young spirit like him, his state of mind had reached a certain height. He would not regret what had happened in the past. He would only plan for what would happen in the future. The past was the past. There was no point in dwelling on it. His problem was, how is he going to reconstruct his body? Before, if Lu Xiaoyi didn't touch this chaos power, he would be in a difficult situation. He would need to slowly turn this chaos power into his own, then merge with the Moho Roja's divine head and return to his human shape. This process was completely uncontrollable. It was impossible for such a huge sphere of energy to exist without being noticed by others forever. If he wanted to regain control of the chaos power, he would need a lot of time. It might even take years or even decades. This made the process full of variables. He would definitely be discovered by cultivators passing by. Perhaps the three swordsmen would not let him go. They would use all kinds of methods to disturb him. How could he have the chance to do this? This was the result he had to avoid, because if he did this, he would become a target floating in the universe. Countless malicious intents would swarm toward him until he was completely destroyed. As a young spirit, he was being tortured like this in the void, like watching a clown. He could not stand it. Therefore, the real reason why he cut off the swordsman's spiritual spiritium was to force the swordsman to swallow this chaotic energy body. He would lose a large part of his power, but at the same time, he would regain his freedom. He would have a pure body of Moho Roja's divine power, which would allow him to continue in the future. This was to cut off his tail to survive. The swordsman's upper realm was unstoppable. After becoming a nascent spirit, he would be even more terrifying. Lidik Khan no longer had the confidence to fight. As for the oath, he had already made it the first time he was beheaded. This was another benefit of being reborn as a young spirit. Since he had already been killed once, he naturally had to break the previous contract. This was in accordance with the rules of the cultivation world. He would return in the form of a pure Moho Roja. Because of the purity of his divine power, it would not be too difficult for him to break away. When the swordsman finished absorbing the chaotic energy, there might be a small chance that he would be beheaded by the swordsman again, but it would only be once at most. He had only been beheaded 3 times in total. So how could the swordsman see through his true foundation? In the beginning of the upper realm, a cultivator was not suited for battle. He needed to adapt to all kinds of things, and it was impossible for him to control his new self freely. This was an opportunity. This was Lidik Khan's plan. While he was plotting against the swordsman, he was also planning for his own life. The swordsman had too many secrets. Space travel, 10 fragments in the mud ball. These were all first-hand secrets. He wanted to send these back to the Hung River realm, so that the next time they met, the Hung River realm would not hesitate to send their strongest forces to deal with this terrifying opponent. He could not be careless anymore. He could not let the swordsman grow into a young spirit. If he did, would there be a way for others to survive? Lu Xiaoyi mustered all his strength and absorbed the chaotic energy with all his might to nourish his own nascent spirit. This was already the last stage of forming the nascent spirit, the last crucial step. There was no quantitative standard for how much chaotic energy he had to absorb, and there was no such thing as absorbing the entire chaotic energy to satisfy the needs of the upper realm nascent spirit. But for a cultivator, they had to absorb all the chaotic energy during this period of time. No one would leave a mouthful of energy outside. This was the momentum, but Lytic Khan just had to meet such a person. This bastard clearly had the ability to absorb the chaotic energy, but he did not do so. Instead, he left a clump of energy. It was like eating a pancake with a piece left, or eating a watermelon with a tooth left. At this moment, the void cleared and the chaotic energy was gone. The three of them faced each other in the sky, and there was still a clump of energy in the corner. Lu Xiaoyi was proud and full of affection as he recited in the air. My nascent spirit has reached the great success stage. My mother often beat me, but I don't know how hard it is to cultivate. Words of love should be self-encouragement, but old habits are hard to break. I don't know the deep meaning, but I don't want the dog to leave leftovers. Some flatterers cheered loudly. Good poem, good poem. The meaning is profound, and it will last forever. Fellow Taoist, your nascent spirit has reached the great success stage. The Sword Tomb Bearer congratulates junior brother. Lu Xiaoyi gladly accepted it, not knowing what modesty was. He only stared at the clump of energy, and his eyes gradually turned cold. Want to run? You'll have to eat my sword. If I can't kill you, it's because I don't have the ability. If I kill you, don't blame the Xinyuan people. Chapter 1661. As soon as his voice faded, Lu Xiaoyi pursed his lips and sucked in the remaining energy form. To him, this was something that he could do without. Lytic Sweat didn't want to waste any more time, and neither did he. How could a swordsman be so slow when killing someone? As soon as the last energy form disappeared, a Meho Roha immortal image with a human body and a snake head appeared out of thin air. At the same time, 3 sword lights flew out. One of them was like a chaotic light, giving Lytic Sweat a taste of his own medicine. It was a future with no choice, only a target. One sword strike in the past, nearly 100 times in the past, it was hard to tell the real from the fake. However, the sword light didn't hesitate at all, only slashing at a staggering old bull in one of the past. Its body was covered in dust, but it couldn't hide its white fur and the huge tumor on its back. The 3 sword lights slashed down at the same time, accompanied by a long sigh, and an extremely majestic Tao vanishing phenomenon appeared out of thin air. Light and Piggyback stepped forward together. They were about to congratulate, but they were stopped by someone with a pretentious face. Slow down. I'm going to recite a poem to congratulate the upper realm. The two were speechless. Piggyback was curious. Didn't junior brother already recite it? I think it's pretty good. Lu Xiaoyi looked up at the sky. That's a limerick to piss off that hangy man. I have to think of a poem that's truly worthy of me, a grand one. This is something that will be written in my biography in the future. I can't be careless. The two waited, but they had to satisfy this person's perverted interests, who knew that after waiting for a long time, they still couldn't come up with anything. Light yelled, "Enough! Stop putting on an act. With your little ink, you can only write a limerick. What are you pretending for?" Lu Xiaoyi chuckled. Indeed, he couldn't write one. All the good upper realm poems had been written by Crow Ancestor, so he couldn't copy them. He looked at Piggyback and sized him up. There's one more. You've completely recovered, and you seem to have improved a little. Are you still not convinced? I'll give you a chance while my upper realm is still unstable. This is a rare opportunity. Dai Huai sighed. I'm convinced. I have cultivated the sword for countless years, and I have never submitted to anyone, including my senior brothers in the Sword Tomb. However, my sword skills compared to junior brothers is like a firefly compared to the stars. I can't compare at all. I've already told junior brother Guang Yao that I'm going to travel with him and then return to Xinyuan. As a guest cultivator, I'll see if I can become Xuanyuan's in-name disciple and learn Xuanyuan's mid-range and long-range attacks. Previously, I was rash and almost caused junior apprentice brother Guang Yao to return his position. My heart is really uneasy. Lu Xiaoyi looked at light illumination. This is senior brother's matter. It's not my place to interfere. Senior martial brother, you could decide for yourself. He understood what his senior brother meant. Deep down, he still wanted to help Xin Yuan find a powerful ally, especially since they were both from the Sword Dao lineage. That was why he didn't mention their previous grudges. One had to know that this wasn't a trivial grudge. This was a life and death grudge. If he hadn't coincidentally met Lu Xiaoyi's rebellion against the Five Ties, even if he was still alive, he would have completely lost the chance to reach the upper realm. No matter how open-minded a swordsman was, he wouldn't be so open-minded to the point where he could easily let go of someone who wanted to kill him. This could only mean that this senior brother valued the general situation and the interests of the sect more than himself. This was a kind of quality. Lu Xiaoyi didn't want to interfere, but that didn't mean that he wouldn't use other methods. He never hid his suspicions, because this was the only way to prevent those who were doubted from suspecting him. You're so sneaky, who knows what you're thinking? I'm too lazy to guess. However, I'm worried about you. Where's your home? If I have the chance, I'll pay a visit to your family. I, Xin Yuan, can't accept someone for no reason and not explain it to the master of the sect. Dazzling Light sighed. This junior brother was even more ruthless. Not only did he want to accept one person, he wanted to accept a whole nest of them and wipe them all out. However, these words were said so openly, and it didn't make people feel disgusted. This was the art of speech, and even more so, the art of being a person. This junior brother was able to do so well in the universe, not only because of his swordsmanship, but also because of the way he conducted himself. When you use the truth instead of lies to achieve your goal, it is a whole new level of communication. Dazzling Light was ashamed of his inferiority on this point. Other than being a little older, he wasn't fit to call anyone junior brother. There wasn't anything wrong with it. To a demon, other than adapting, what else could you do? Shi Huai raised his head and made a decision. Swordsmen didn't judge people by the length of time. The establishment of trust was often in an instant. This was the feeling that Lu Xiaoyi gave him. He was ruthless, tyrannical, and merciless. He destroyed Dazzling Light, and this guy immediately turned around and destroyed him. He was the epitome of a swordsman who would seek revenge for the smallest grievance. However, his ruthlessness didn't make people feel disgusted. He also didn't have a lofty and arrogant personality. The feeling he gave was that even if they couldn't become friends, they could entrust their lives to each other. Ever since I came to the Origin world 300 years ago, I've never revealed my sect to anyone. However, Junior Brother Lu, you're the first person I'm willing to tell, because I believe that the senior brothers of the Sword Catacomb will definitely be willing to meet you. I only have one request. No matter what Junior Brother says, just don't let them capture me. It's not easy to come out, and I still haven't strolled around enough. The three of them walked together and didn't mention a single word about Liticon. This was because from the beginning to the end, the two cripples had seen everything. They had their own judgment from their own point of view. If Lu Xiaoyi explained, it would definitely be from his own ability. It might be suitable for him, but might not be suitable for others. Instead, it would be easy for others to misunderstand. An important core concept was that there couldn't be only one way to solve a problem. Therefore, if the same problem was given to different cultivators to solve, then there would definitely be different methods. You only needed to find the one that was most suitable for you. What did other people have to do with you? Guang Yao changed the topic. Junior Brother, these people from Hung River are really hateful. They're using the characteristics of us swordsmen to achieve their own goals. Extremely treacherous, extremely cunning. As a young spirit, he disregarded the convention and acted on his own accord. If we expose his actions, it will definitely ruin the Anchor Chain's reputation. What do you think? However, Lu Xiaoyi had a different opinion. I don't think so. Even if we ruin the reputation of Hung River, it doesn't mean that those domains will definitely side with the Fifth Ring. This isn't a choice between two. There are many choices. Personally, I think that their performance in the miniature scene already eliminated them. It's just that no one expressed it. There's no need for us to add fuel to the fire and force the anchor chain to make a choice. The main point of a diplomatic mission is to not be overbearing. You can kill people quickly, but it's best to be clumsy with your words. The people of the anchor chain understand that they have their own plans. You don't need to worry about them. Chapter 1662. Light Illumination nodded, agreeing with his junior brother's judgment. Then, we don't need to deal with the remaining Hung River cultivators? Lu Xiaoyi smiled coldly. They're just some rotten fish and shrimps. Killing them will only alert the people of Hung River. There's no other meaning. What we need is a final decision, not a piece of cake. Light Illumination roughly understood what he meant. Going too far was as bad as not going far enough. Under the support of the Battle of Domains, they must not use too much force. If they were too conspicuous, the fifth ring would be besieged by all the external forces. They had to have a sense of propriety and trust in the eyes of the anchor chain. Things should stop at a certain point. The fifth ring had already shown what they should do, so there was no need to force the anchor chain to make a decision. If the anchor chain really made a decision, not only would the hostility of Hung River's light, Fu Chun, and the Buddhists become more obvious, even Zhou Xian and Heaven's Choice, who originally had a good impression of each other, would become distant. This was a very subtle psychology. It would be better to do nothing from now on and live a carefree life. We can build a good relationship with Fu Chun and Heaven's Choice. This is our next goal. The two chatted freely, but Backtree was not interested in these trivial matters. It was not that he was pure as a swordsman, but that he lived a simple life. His sect also never participated in the chaos of the universe, living a detached life. Light Illumination said softly, "Junior brother, is the matter in Dutian settled?" Lu Xiaoyi nodded. "It's done, so I'm going to Dutian. Clean up the mess. This kind of thing can't be hidden, because the truth won't be hidden forever. Zhai Xing and the others are not kind people. They might throw out the truth when facing Jing. I have to take the initiative." Backtree probably knew what he had done before, so he laughed. "Admit your mistake after killing someone? Junior brother, you have guts. But Dutian is full of hidden dragons and crouching tigers. There should be at least 7 or 8 young gods, right? Why don't we go with you? We can cover for you." Light Illumination nodded. "That's right. Junior brother, don't be arrogant. Taoist young gods cannot be underestimated. One doesn't matter, but if there are several, who can guarantee that they can escape unscathed?" Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. "We're not going to fight. There was another reason. It's not good for too many people to go. It'll make us look guilty, and it'll be meaningless. Light is different from Fu Chun. They're a potential threat to us. Therefore, we must plant a thorn between them and Dutian. This was not a matter of using force. You don't have to worry about my safety. At worst, I'll just enter the dimensional space. There won't be any danger." Brilliant Light was a little impulsive when it involved himself, but when it involved others, he was very thoughtful. It's indeed inappropriate to follow you into the metropolis realm. It might affect your plans. However, it's also wrong to completely ignore it. We have to have a plan to deal with the unknown. How about this? The two of us will find a place outside the Dutian realm and wait for you. If anything happens, you can run in this direction. If the 3 of us join forces, we won't be able to kill a few young gods, but we can still escape on our own." Lu Xiaoyi couldn't refuse, so he could only agree. "You're not looking for fragments anymore? The fragments may recognize us, but we can't recognize them. Since we're not fated, what's the point of looking for them?" The 3 of them went straight to Dutian. During this time, Brilliant Light gave Lu Xiaoyi a good overview of Dutian's current situation, including the characteristics of the orthodoxy, the attitude of the forces, and the structure of the cultivators. This was also the effort that the 7 of them had to put into the anchor chain for 100 years. In the heavenly eye, a light was extinguished. That was the light of a young god. Even in the entire universe, it wasn't a very ordinary existence. It was the top of the cultivation world. A Taoist true immortal's consciousness transmitted. This is the second person, right? The first person he killed was also a Yin god, and now it's a young god. Everyone is like this. In the long run, the heavenly I doesn't need to do anything. An internal strife will cause it to fall apart. I think he should be severely punished. A true Buddha of Buddhism said, I second that. When the heavenly I was first established, the inner scroll was the first precept. This child has violated the precepts time and time again. If we don't stop him, we won't be able to restrain him in the future. Monk Minghui and Ricticon were both people of the heavenly eye. Lu Xiaoyi had killed them. To him, this was a matter of course, but the upper echelons of the heavenly eye clearly didn't think so. Lord Numinous Treasure's consciousness was distant. My Numinous Treasure race shouldn't interfere in the affairs of you humans. In history, I have never crossed the line. However, I don't have any dissent. It's not that I'm trying to protect myself or not asking about the heavenly eye, but that the two of you have always been fair and impartial, upholding the law. I have no reason to interrupt. However, since the collapse of the Great Tao and the restart of the epoch, why do I feel that the attitudes of the two of you have changed? Are you no longer the two selfless rulers from before? Have you become calculative, not caring about right and wrong, and only looking at appearances? The reason you said is something that the cultivators of the mortal world can say. With your status and ability, can you say it? Chapter 1663. Outside the capital realm, the three swordsmen agreed on a meeting location. Then, he entered the realm alone. Why did they have to agree to Takizawa's final request? In fact, at the last moment of Takizawa's life, Takizawa understood very clearly that none of these grand cultivators were short-sighted. They knew what was best for themselves and their sect. For Takizawa himself, there was a chance that he would reincarnate and cultivate again. This chance was much higher than normal cultivators. This was because he had once received the supreme inheritance of the star-plucking sect. Therefore, death did not completely mean the end to him. It could also be the beginning of a new chapter. Based on this philosophy, he made the best choice between the enemy who wanted to kill him and the two sects that he once belonged to. He chose to forget his hatred and serve his second sect, while also leaving the right to take revenge on his first sect. Under this arrangement, he could only choose to bury the hatchet with the murderer, including the powerful background behind the murderer. This was also something he did not want to face even if he reincarnated. Should he deal with the star-plucking sect, or the star-plucking sect and the fifth ring sect? Any rational person would know which choice to make. This was not because Lu Xiaoyi was handsome, nor was it because he had the aura of a main character. It was because Takizawa's last and best choice. He knew many of the capital realm's true secrets, and he was even more clear about the attitude of the capital realm's higher-ups in this matter. Therefore, this visit was not as dangerous as imagined. Normal people would not have such courage, but the swordsman definitely did. He was still using the identity of Tiango, because the real Tiango had already been sent far away by the star-plucking sect. This identity was not the best choice, but it would be even more inappropriate if he changed to Lu Xiaoyi directly. With his reputation, no matter where he appeared, he would destroy the balance. Unknowingly, he had already become a role model, the type that did not play a good role. In the cultivation world, there were no absolute friends, especially between powers. A truly responsible major force or domain would make all their decisions based on their own interests and nothing else. This had nothing to do with what kind of friends the fifth ring had. There was only one reason why the star-plucking sect chose the fifth ring sect. They felt that they could obtain the greatest benefits from it. That was all. Therefore, one could not blindly rely on it. Because you don't know when and for what reason, there will be some inexplicable changes in the relationship between two parties. The most important thing was to expand the contact area of the five rings. If the East didn't shine, the West would shine. I'm an outer realm cultivator, and I request an audience with you, Lord. Lu Xiaoyi was very courteous. The receptionist was even more courteous than him. These individual cultivators were a force that could not be underestimated in the void of the universe. They were the type that could not accomplish anything but were good at spoiling things. Without any special reason, even the great forces of the great domains would be courteous to such supremes. Your presence brings light to my humble dwelling. I wonder if Master is here to find a friend, or come to my Du Guanyo. Lu Xiaoyi didn't beat around the bush. If you want to see Senior Marshal Brother Dang Guan, you don't know anything. Please pass the message on my behalf. Unknown matter means that I have a big secret that I want to share with the people of your temple. Senior Marshal Brother Dang Guan. He himself was a primordial soul cultivator, so the Senior Marshal Brother he wanted to see could only be a young spirit. It was just that he couldn't say it out loud. The receptionist served tea and sent out the message. This was a rather awkward moment. Most of the cultivators in the temple had gone to the void to search for fragments and opportunities. In fact, there were very few great cultivators in the sect. However, because young spirits rarely participated in such matters, there were quite a few young spirits left in the temple. Could it be that this wild cultivator had other intentions for choosing this time to come? In an instant, a message came back from the temple. The receptionist gestured with his hand. A few ancestors are discussing matters in the main hall. Why don't I invite Master over? Don't you want to see the young spirit ancestors? All right, I'll take you to see them. It's just a few ancestors and a few young spirits. Let's see if you have guts. This was exactly what Lu Xiaoyi wanted, so he followed along, happy and content. In the main hall, there were 4 Dutian young spirits. Why were they discussing matters? Because the most outstanding primordial spirit Jinjuan of the Dutian sect, Long Zhe, had died without knowing why. Among them, the foolish young spirit, who was the best at divination, had divined when Lu Xiaoyi came to ask for an audience. He knew that the right and wrong of this matter was probably related to this visitor, which was why he had received him this time. Otherwise, it would be difficult for a wild cultivator's primordial spirit to bear the pomp of 4 Taoist young spirits. As soon as he entered the Duqian Hall, the 4 cultivators pressed down like mountains, but they couldn't stop the wild cultivator in front of them from walking calmly. Although his face was covered by a mask, they could still feel that this person's strength was like the deep sea, without a bottom line. This was very abnormal, because the natural realm pressure of the upper level of Yang spirit was not something that could be ignored just because one wanted to. It contained a very profound Tao state power, as if they were not pressuring a person, but a part of the universe. This was not something that ordinary wild cultivators could do. They were very sure. Wild cultivators generally showed their strength, but they lacked the temperament that could only be cultivated in the top forces, where they could remain calm even if the stars collapsed in front of them. Hiding one's face is not the way of cultivation. The Dutian sect has been established for tens of thousands of years, but we have never received a person like you who hides his face so openly. Do you have anything to say? Taoist Feng Du, who was the leader, was aggressive from the beginning. Lu Xiaoyi had no intention of taking off his mask. Since he came in wearing it, he would not take it off. Otherwise, he should have come in with his real face. For cultivators like them, to identify a cultivator's identity, appearance was the most important thing. Breath, divine sense, and so on were more important. It's just a fig leaf. If you wear on your face, at least there's room to maneuver. If you really show it, it'll be inconvenient for you to talk. I'm afraid you'll be suspected of using your power to oppress others. Feng Du's eyes narrowed. Using his power to oppress others? Who could use his power to oppress his Dutian domain? Needless to say, this was another big force from outside. Which one was it? Since you don't want to show your true face, please tell us your purpose. Although we are from a small sect, we can't afford to be the arrival of an expert. I'm afraid I'll make a mistake if I speak too much. If I offend the upper realm, I'm afraid it'll be a disaster for the realm. Lu Xiaoyi smiled slightly. Although there was no great danger in coming in contact with Du Tian, the art of speaking was very difficult to master. If he spoke too harshly, he would appear overbearing, but if he spoke too softly, it would make people feel that he had something to ask for. I'm here to return a set of treasures to your sect. Without hesitation, he waved his hand, and 3 cauldrons and a jade floated in the air. It was the set of treasures that Takizawa had taken away. The 4 young gods were slightly moved. They were discussing Takizawa's death, and to a large extent, it was because they had lost this set of treasures. But now that it was suddenly returned, none of the 4 took it because what they took was not the treasures, but karma. Fengdu pretended to be surprised. Such a treasure. Why don't you keep it for yourself? Why return it? Lu Xiaoyi sneered. It can grow wings. Why look up to a ladder? Chapter 1664. Fengdu stopped underestimating him and realized that the cultivator in front of him was not to be trifled with. Thus, he lowered his posture and said in an equal tone, "Since fellow Taoist has returned Du Tian's treasure, then you must be clear about the person who stole the treasure and killed him, right?" Lu Xiaoyi did not evade. "Of course I am clear about it. He killed and stole the treasure and gave it back. He is indeed the same person." The 4 young gods had already expected this. They were still surprised that this person was so frank. What was fearless? This was fearless. The way Taoists did things was to reciprocate politeness. So even if he was a murderer, he came to your mountain gate and took the initiative to admit it. This in itself represented something. What's more, he had returned your sect's treasure. This was not a chance encounter in the void, where enmity would be settled when they bumped into each other. This was a visit and an attitude. Then, as a force of the big world, they had to show their attitude. Fengdu said in a deep voice, "Takizawa was a pillar of Du Tian. How can fellow Taoists teach me about his death?" Lu Xiaoyi took out a jade slip. "This is Takizawa's last words. You will know after you read it." The 4 young gods scanned it with their divine senses and were shocked. The cause and effect were clear at a glance. They had heard about Takizawa's experience in the past few hundred years. It was also a very strange thing. There was a faint big force against him, but it was done in an extremely secretive manner. From all the signs, it did not seem to be against Du Tian, but more like a purely personal dispute. Now it seemed that it was actually Zhai Xing. Du Tian and Zhai Xing had adhered to the strategy of not interfering with each other all these years. After all, there were 2 anchor claws. It was not to the point of fighting each other to the death. It was not good for anyone. Regarding the big traitor in Zhai Xing, they were all young gods and had seen a lot. Of course, they had heard of him, but they did not expect him to be transferred to Du Tian Temple. Then, there was a very difficult question. Was Takizawa a Zhai Xing? Or was he a Du Tian? How could they simply treat this massacre as a provocation to Du Tian? Lu Xiaoyi said seriously, "There are no innocent people here. There are no victims. It was just one of the countless helplessness of the universe's cultivation world." Zhai Xing did not want to fall into a passive position and did not want to have irreconcilable conflicts with Du Tian. Other than assassination, they couldn't find a better way. Du Tian is not wrong. But if everyone knows Takizawa's origin, will they still regard him as a pillar? He will not betray Du Tian. This can be seen from the fact that he entrusted me to bring back the 3 treasures before he died. However, he will definitely cause a rift between Du Tian and Zhai Xing. At that time, the one who will have to pay the price will not only be Zhai Xing, but also Du Tian. Takizawa didn't seem to be wrong either. He was only doing what a cultivator should do. Am I wrong? I want to obtain Zhai Xing's support, but I also don't want to give up Du Tian's recognition. That's why he helped Zhai Xing kill Takizawa and brought Sanbao here to beg for mercy. That's what I'm here to express. Everyone is doing what they think they should do. Fortunately, it seems that we don't have any fundamental differences in direction." Yu Ji snorted coldly. "Fellow Taoist, you are trying to confuse us." Long Zhe was a Du Tian cultivator before he reached the upper Yang spirit realm. You can't convict him of something he hasn't done. What if he can't reach the upper Yang spirit realm? Then he will be the strongest primordial spirit in Du Tian and will contribute a lot to Du Tian. In the end, he will lose his life just for the possibility of a future. Lu Xiaoyi didn't deny it. In fact, It was impossible for him to confuse the four yang spirits. What he really wanted to do was that in the cultivation world, there were always countless sacrifices and countless people who gave up on themselves to achieve power. When the wood had already been turned into a boat, would you choose to be carefree and take revenge? Or would you rationally choose the most beneficial result for Du Tian based on reality? Senior is right. I am indeed doing this for my own purpose. There is no doubt about that. Therefore, I will send Sanbao back. I hope that the virtuous people of Du Tian can make a rational judgment about this. He didn't quibble. His straightforwardness made the four yang spirits feel at least comfortable. What they needed to see now was, among the yang spirits in Du Tian, were the rational ones the majority, or were the unrestrained ones the majority? Even the glorious light sect's 100 years of spying could not get an accurate answer. Fengdo narrowed his eyes. Fellow Taoist, you are from the fifth ring, right? Lu Xiaoyi didn't deny it. This kind of thing couldn't be hidden from others. Because of the difference in style, there seemed to be no other family besides the fifth ring who could do such a big thing and still dare to swagger to their door. After making a mistake and doing something bad, one of the prerequisites for obtaining the forgiveness of others was to not hide it and not try to cover it up. This was the cornerstone of understanding. The fifth ring has always been at odds with the radiant world. It's impossible to reconcile, but we have nothing to do with Du Tian. So from a psychological point of view, we don't want your world to get too close to the radiant world. The matter of Takizawa may become the glue between Du Tian and the radiant world, but it may also provide an opportunity for Du Tian and the fifth ring to understand each other. I hope it's the latter. For your world, why don't you look at the sincerity of others and compare goods? One of the yang spirits who had been silent all this time said, in fact, you can also reveal the news to us first, and then everyone can come up with a feasible method. But there's no need to be so anxious. This kind of thing, no matter who it is a kind of insult. Lu Xiaoyi disagreed. If it's really possible to do this, why didn't Zhaixing do it for hundreds of years? They had the most reason to do so. Maintaining the stability between the two largest forces in the anchor chain was far more important than a single cultivator. We can't do this, because if we really reveal it in advance, the seniors will inevitably have countless guesses. Is someone using this to sow discord, weaken, and split Du Tian? The final result will be endless delay until both sides lose patience. Without Takizawa recovering his memory, I'm afraid that the tens of thousands of years of stability between your two families will be broken, and you'll go from collaborators to enemies and be hostile to each other. Therefore, it's best for an outsider like me to do it. The yang spirits were silent. This was the truth. It was difficult to do what was said, but it was easier to do it. Many things in the cultivation world were like this, and it was also the beginning of countless wrangling. They were hesitating. In fact, it wasn't that they were hesitating now, but that they had been hesitating all this time. The general trend of the universe was still very chaotic, and the future was unclear. They originally belonged to the kind of people who hoped that the anchor chain would float and sink and the radiant world would unite to form another faction. But now it seemed that the ideal was full, but the reality was very thin. Only when the major forces gathered together in the anchor chain did they feel how unreliable the so-called alliance was. There was no cohesion, no centripetal force, no core, no concept. If everyone just huddled together for warmth, what was the point of such an alliance? It could fall apart at any time. Chapter 1665. Lu Xiaoyi did not receive a definite answer. This was within his expectations. The fact that Du Tian could accept the three treasures and walk out of the Du Tian mountain gate unscathed meant something. He had to leave enough time for him to consider and think. He could not put down his pride now, but in the future he could give both sides a way out through an unexpected event. Even before he left, Du Tian's son God still warned him that he would not be lenient when they met in the void in the future. This was a situation that he had to go through. One thing was true. When Takizawa's reincarnation identity was exposed, He was no longer a pure Dutian cultivator. No one could avoid this and pretend not to know the huge changes that his true awakening would bring to Dutian. Of course, you could pretend that nothing had happened when the small splinter pierced your hand, and it was indeed nothing serious. But this splinter would quietly appear in your leisure time, in silence, when you were deep in thought, and when you were not paying attention, to remind you of its existence. Lu Xiaoyi had to wait. He had to wait until Dutian was annoyed and wanted to pull out this wooden thorn. He could pass her a small knife or tweezers from the side, or help her apply ointment, blow a few breaths, and say a few heartwarming words. This was the propriety of a cultivator. This was temperament. It didn't suit his usual carefree style. Junior Marshal brother, it's best to stay on the anchor chain for a while. Zhaixing is not stable, Dutian is not stable, and Hung River is unpredictable. The key is to consolidate your foundation in the initial stage. All right, you gave Zhaixing away. How are you going to explain it to them? After the three of them met, Guang Yao reminded him. Lu Xiaoyi had a scoundrel face. I'll tell them the truth. I told Dutian everything, so of course I can't favor one over the other. It's the same for Zhaixing. When I go back, I'll tell them that I had no choice but to reveal my secret. I'm willing to build a bridge between them. Guang Yao was speechless. Come to think of it, telling the truth was indeed the best way. It might cause a moment of unhappiness, but in the long run, it would completely eliminate the hidden danger. This move was a bit like a scoundrel in the marketplace. Not everyone could use it, but Lu Xiaoyi could. This was the effect that could only be achieved by personal charm and strength. One of them had outstanding strength and was already heading for double digits after sun slaying. The other had a strong background and was a bit of a scoundrel in character. What else could you say other than shaking your head and complaining? Reputation and strength were also important components of a diplomatic mission. This was something that had to be acknowledged. If the Crow ancestor was still here, he would just need to sit here and everything would be fine. They would have already held a Dharma assembly to celebrate the birth of the alliance, and at the same time, they would also have to fight to be the vanguard. We'll have to stay for a while, and there are many things. Senior brother, I think that sometimes when you do things, you can drag Zhou Xian along. Don't put on airs. The Fifth Ring and Zhou Xian are already standing in the same trench. Whether we do it or not, others will think so. Why don't we just dafa? Guang Yao nodded. I've had this intention for a long time. We'll start when they come back. Zhou Xian, what's up with that female cultivator called Kawa? I heard that you and this woman have some ambiguous relationship in Zhou Xian. Are you clean? If you're really close to her, what do you need me to keep quiet about? Lu Xiaoyi chuckled. There's nothing that can't be said. What do I have to hide? She's just a senior sister, and our relationship is just ordinary. At the side, Piggyback was getting impatient. I say, can't you guys talk about something more meaningful? What's there to talk about, women? One is hemming and hawing. The other is trying to cover it up. Isn't it just romantic debts everywhere? What's the big deal? Lu Xiaoyi was silent. He was in trouble, and it wasn't small. It wasn't in Hung River, nor was it in star-plucking sky. It was the information obtained after killing Li Taikan. The young god of Hung River was also a heavenly eye. This problem was a little tricky. Even someone as careless as him knew that after he entered Heavenly Eye, he had only completed one mission, and it couldn't be considered a success. However, he had already killed 2 of his own people. Regardless of the specific reason, the fact that this was a fact would not be pleasant to hear. Therefore, he stayed here to consolidate his realm and to wait for news from Heavenly Eye. He needed to settle these troubles before he could set out with peace of mind. Time passed slowly, and the order of the anchor chain seemed to no longer be important. Now, what was more important was the fragments of the 5 ether drifting in the universe, and the countless joys and sorrows it had caused. The most important of which was that someone had killed in Sky Waterfall Lake. The murderer was unknown, and no one knew who had such tyrannical means. In the star-plucking domain, Lu Xiaoyi was living leisurely. His days were leisurely, especially when he had a beautiful senior sister by his side. Kawa's main target was the star-plucking domain, so it was very normal for them to meet here. She wasn't the kind of person who liked to look for so-called opportunities outside. Little E, tell me the truth. Have you already taken down the star plucking domain? Kawa glared at him, because even someone as meticulous as her could feel that the star plucking domain had been a little different recently. When she thought about how this person had fought for the star plucking domain, everything made sense. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. It's not me, it's us. Kawa snorted. You want to tie Zhou Xian to the Fifth Ring's war chariot? Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Senior sister, I'm not tying everyone to the Fifth Ring's war chariot. I'm tying everyone together to form a new war chariot. There are many parts in a war chariot, and the Fifth Ring is only one of the more combative parts. The essence of war is to rope in the majority and kill the minority. If you insist on being aloof, you'll put your fate in the hands of others. Fine. As long as our group is big enough, we'll be able to attract more and more forces to join us. It'll be very difficult at first, but when the snowball reaches a certain size, it'll form a brilliant momentum. Don't fuss over every little thing. Does everyone have to be like-minded? How can there be so many like-minded people? We just need to make sure that before the era changes, our interests are the same, and that's enough. Kawa felt a little helpless. In reality, among the many external forces in the anchor chain, in terms of size, Zhou Xian was second only to Heaven's Choice. But in terms of roots, it was a powerful world in the origin world. Logically speaking, it should be the most respected and naturally formed the core of the origin world. However, after coming to the anchor chain, she realized how naive her thinking was. Zhou Xian was the most despised of all the external forces here. This had nothing to do with size. The same situation was reflected in their attitude towards Heaven's Choice. Wanting to have Zhou Xian as the core was just a dream. Actually, she had a premonition before coming here. Bai Mei and the others also had the same premonition. The origin world was too big, so it was difficult to have a true core. If there had to be one in this kind of chaotic world, it would have to be the most aggressive. Zhou Xian did not have this kind of temperament. Chapter 1666. Lu Xiaoyi found a place to hide in the star-seizing realm. It was also to summarize and reflect on what he had gained in the past few hundred years. This was something he had always insisted on ever since he started cultivating. The direction of his cultivation method could be further expanded instead of being stuck to the Big Dipper scripture. In the primordial spirit realm, the means of his opponents had reached a new height. In the future, he would face challenges from the young gods of various orthodoxies. There were all kinds of secret skills that covered everything. This required him to come into contact with more on the path of cultivation, broaden his horizons, and enrich his foundation. Only then could he respond to different changes at any time. He was lucky to have gathered the 5 grands as well as Hundan. How to make full use of this and manifest this set of Tao state power in swordsmanship was the most important thing for him at this stage. In the cultivation world, very few people used the Tao realm power of the 5 grand essences in battle. This was because it was not sharp enough, and it was easy to learn but hard to master. This was because only when the 5 eccentrics were gathered could the power of the entire basic power be unleashed. He was very lucky, as he had mastered the 5 ties and chaos. Of course, he had to unleash his unique advantage, because the formation of the universe originated from the 5 ties, and from there, the other innate Daos were born. In other words, when he could master the power of the 5 ties, theoretically, he could decipher any innate Daos. Because the foundation was with him, there was no ready-made swordsmanship to learn, not even Xuanyuan's scabbard. Now that his cultivation had reached the immortal divinity stage, the most substantial thing that could increase his strength was the formation of his own vital qi. No matter how the world of cultivation defined this thing, his first task was to convert all of his refined mana into vital qi. Only then could he have a higher efficiency and sharper flying sword. Primordial Chi was compatible and could do anything that magic power could do. If he had Primordial Chi when he was fighting Lydican, the battle would have been much easier. The path of Hengi region was different from the mainstream of cultivation in the universe. It was weirder and easier to see results. But because of this, Hengi region did not have a defensive weapon that orthodox Taoist cultivators had when they reached the level of Yang spirit. The auspicious cloud. This was his good fortune, but also his misfortune. Auspicious clouds, 5-color clouds, auspicious Chi, like smoke but not smoke, like clouds but not clouds, melancholy and bleak, also known as Jingyun, Qingyun. The sun hung leisurely in the vast sky. The 6 mountains were motionless and condensed into flying smoke. Flying geese swam out from below. Auspicious clouds and clear scenery swirled around. It was not something that should be present in the Yang spirit realm, but a vision that only appeared when immortals appeared. It was something that carried the 3 flowers and 5 Chi. It was the recognition of a cultivator who had reached a certain high level in his understanding of Taoist magic. It was a combination of a great cultivator's own Taoist magic, fate, and Taoist magic. Not only did it require extremely high conditions in all aspects, but it also required a very long time to condense. This time could easily start from 1,000 years. Therefore, ordinary Yang Spirit Supremes simply did not have the time to condense such a troublesome thing, even if it did have a miraculous effect and could restrict the opponent's attack and invasion on the level of the Dharma. The condensation of a Yang Spirit was too far-fetched. His cognition in all aspects had not yet been baptized by the declined state. He lacked precipitation and had flaws. It was laborious and unrewarding. However, these were problems more than 10,000 years ago. With the development of the cultivation world and the universe, all kinds of divine skills and secret skills had the tendency to spread downward, especially after the collapse of the Great Way and the chaos of the rules. The gap opened by the heavenly way was not only in the difficulty of the upper realm, but also in other aspects. No one with true power would be greedy and make a bunch of strange defensive methods. They all knew the importance of profoundness, so they often dug out the most effective defense in the aspects they were best at. For example, Qingyun. It turned out that this thing was something that only half-immortals were qualified to dabble in the normal cultivation order. They could create half of a Qingyun to completely solve their own defense system and free up their hands to do other things. Only when they entered the immortal record could they truly condense a complete Qingyun. However, the heavenly way was now chaotic. Although only immortals could condense a true Qingyun according to the rules, the threshold of half a Qingyun had been opened from half-immortals to the top experts of the Yang spirit, especially those with extraordinary backgrounds. Whether or not they could condense half a Qingyun was an important factor in determining the foundation of a Yang spirit. Until now, Lu Xiaoyi had not encountered a Taoist Yang spirit with half a Qingyun. Previously, it was an ordinary Yang spirit. After that, it was Hung He who did not walk the Qingyun path but the divine path, so he had missed it perfectly. However, in the future, it was inevitable that he would encounter such a Yang spirit, so he had to make arrangements in advance and prepare for a rainy day. It was not that he wanted to condense a Qingyun, but when he mastered the 5 empresses of the innate Great Way, it was equivalent to solving the foundation of condensing a Qingyun. If he did not know how to use such innate conditions, wouldn't he be stupid? Among the innate Great Ways, it was not surprising to master a single one. The most important thing was to form a system. For example, the 5 empresses plus the chaos system was the basic system. The most direct appearance was the direct help to the condensation of Qingyun. The 5 virtues system could bring out the faith of all living beings to the extreme. As long as humans were not extinct, it would be inexhaustible. The 5 lux system could see through 10,000 years and solve all mysteries. The space-time system formed by time and space, the reincarnation system formed by karma, and so on. Mastering a system would have great power. However, in the previous collapse of the Great Way, there was no collapse of system. Instead, there was a collapse of system. The 5 empresses were the first to form a system. They could collapse in a system, but it was impossible for cultivators to learn in a system. This was the difference. Therefore, his current level of mastery of the Tao realm provided a solid foundation for condensing Qingyun, or through the process of condensing Qingyun, to deduce a certain offensive skill. In this sense, the primordial spirit realm was of great help to him. It was so great that if he completed his plan, he could even fight against the top yang spirit without dodging. In a swordsman's battle, it would never be able to achieve a balance of offense and defense. Without such a philosophy and ability, the swordsman would always be in an awkward position when it came to defense. Swordsmen would always attack and use offense to replace defense. This was a philosophy, but it could not be applied everywhere. There would always be situations that you would not expect, especially when the opponent knew that you were a swordsman but was still willing to fight with you in an open space. There must be a way. There must be a way. The swordsman's sword always made people feel helpless. But why were others always helpless? If Lu Xiaoyi was a Dharma cultivator, he would think of 1,000 ways to restrict the swordsman's escape. No one was a fool. When a swordsman went up against a Yuanying or a Zhenjuan, it could be clearly seen in many cases of death. They were greatly restricted in the battle environment. Just like in the battle between Lu Xiaoyi and Hengyang Spirit, he was actually pulled into a situation where he could not escape. This was the meaning of Qingyun. Chapter 1667. Lu Xiaoyi focused on his own cultivation. With his status, it was not suitable for him to go out and build relationships, so it was better to leave it to the 7 messengers of the 5th ring. This was a long process. He liked to cut the Gordian knot and do what he liked. Even if he had nothing to do and slept, it was better than thinking about this and that all day long. Kawa did not come often. She was busy communicating with the other cultivators of Zhou, including the people of the 5th ring. The premise of establishing an alliance was to understand each other's character, habits, style of doing things, and demands. In the end, it was difficult for them to make a final decision. They still needed the approval of the higher-ups of both sides. The alliance of domains was related to the future of thousands of cultivators. It was not something that could be decided on a whim. From this point of view, he had already regarded himself as a superior, although he did not feel it. Xiaoyi, what are you practicing? The top of your head is covered in dust and fog, and there is a strange smell. Are you practicing to urge the rain? Or did you eat too much and fart? Kawa found it strange when she saw by chance. Only she could see it. If others came to visit, Lu Xiaoyi would not show it to others. Almost everyone who stayed with Lu Xiaoyi for a long time would more or less be influenced by his way of speaking. It was as if they would feel uncomfortable if they did not say a few words to disgust him. Lu Xiaoyi was proud. This is the auspicious cloud. Isn't it amazing? Kawa was shocked. How could she not know about the auspicious cloud? It was a rare thing that only the top yang spirit could cultivate. It was said that once it was cultivated, it would be invulnerable to water and fire, and could form an effective defense against any kind of attack. It was the culmination of high-end cultivators' defense. There was only one cloud, and there was no need for other defensive methods. In Zhou, in the carefree travel, she had only seen Senior Brother Bai Mei cultivate such a cloud. According to him, it was far from half a cloud. This guy was only a primordial spirit cultivator, and a new one at that. How could he cultivate such a thing? Out of curiosity, she waved her hand lightly, bringing up a gust of wind. She really did not use any strength. It was just 10% of a normal spell. The wind blew past, and the thin cloud was like cotton, and in an instant, it was blown away without a trace. Lu Xiaoyi could not stop it in time. He watched his auspicious cloud disappear with the wind and could not help but complain. It was supposed to be an auspicious day, but in the end, it became a fleeting cloud. Senior sister is really unromantic. Too much. Kawa covered her mouth and laughed Xiaoyi. Xiaoyi, this is an auspicious cloud? I'm afraid it is not even a rain cloud. Don't use it in a real battle. If others see it, you'll be a joke. Although she said that, she was also surprised in her heart, because her wind was not an ordinary breeze, but a Taoist wind. No matter how powerful or weak it was, once it was used, it was impossible for it to disappear on its own. If it was a real rain cloud, this gust of wind would have blown thousands of miles away after dispersing the rain cloud. However, after blowing away Lu Xiaoyi's so-called auspicious cloud, her wind also disappeared completely. Even she, a caster, could not feel how it disappeared. Xiaoyi, I heard that there are many kinds of auspicious clouds. There are visionary auspicious clouds, harmonious auspicious clouds, ambitious auspicious clouds, 5-color auspicious clouds, 3-flower auspicious clouds, and so on. Senior brother by May cultivates the 3-flower auspicious cloud. What kind of auspicious cloud is yours? Lu Xiaoyi said discouragingly, this is not an auspicious cloud, it's a haze. Actually, the so-called auspicious cloud had a lot to do with the Tao realm that the cultivator had grasped. For example, the visionary auspicious cloud was an auspicious cloud that only the heavens did not speak. It was an auspicious cloud that showed people an image. Taoist things were shrouded in clouds and mist. He was too lazy to care about what kind of auspicious cloud he would create. After all, it was based on the 5 ties. He had not thought about what to merge into it in the end. Grasping too many Tao realms was also troublesome. It was not easy to choose. He did not want to give up on any of them, but he also knew that this was not appropriate. He could not put all the Tao realms together and have a universe stew. The condensation of auspicious clouds could not be done overnight. Even if he had a deep foundation of the 5 ties and could feel the auspicious clouds faster than others, if he wanted to reach a level that could help him in battle, it would still take a long time. He was afraid that it would not be able to help him in a short period of time. Every time he ascended to the next level, it was the beginning of a new journey. Cultivation was so addictive. You would never lose your pursuit of your goal, because when you climbed to a peak, there would definitely be another peak waving at you. Senior sister, have you heard of the yin-yang auspicious cloud? Kawa thought for a moment. It's the first time I've heard of it. Can every innate great Tao form an independent auspicious cloud? However, I heard that only golden immortals who are compatible with the innate great Tao are qualified to form an innate great Tao auspicious cloud. What's the origin of your yin-yang auspicious cloud? Lu Xiaoyi said with a naughty smile. Yin and yang, clouds give birth to dense mist. One is active and one is still. The Tao is natural. If senior sister wants to learn, I can teach you. Kawa finally understood. This was dual cultivation. This could also produce auspicious clouds? She would not try it. It was obviously a trap. This thing's mind was all messy things all day long. She swept away and said, Go back and find your senior sister in the dome. Yanmeng? Yandai? Is there a chimney? Lu Xiaoyi shook his head inwardly. That bastard Guang, Yao had really exposed him completely. In the star-picking mountain sect, Broken Silkworm was sitting alone in a quiet room. He had been in seclusion for a period of time and had handed over the matters of the sect to the other Yang gods. The star-picking mountain was not only his, and he had never monopolized it. A junior martial brother transmitted with his divine sense. Senior martial brother, that little guy exposed all of our secrets in Dutian. He's really despicable. How are we going to get along with Dutian in the future? Broken Silkworm was indifferent. Did Dutian find trouble with us? No. Then what are you worried about? After removing a piece of your heart, you can face Dutian openly. Other than losing some face, what you've obtained is a stable future. What else are you dissatisfied with? You should have told us in advance. Get used to it. Swordsmen are used to doing things first. This is a bad habit passed down from their ancestors. But if you think about it carefully, you'll be able to see the deeper meaning behind it. In the future, if everyone is really tied together, It's better to be honest about such dirty things as early as possible. Is it comfortable to wait until after the alliance is formed and then be exposed by someone with ulterior motives? The junior martial brother retreated. Broken Silkworm smiled bitterly. This little guy was really watertight when doing things. Sly and cunning. But this kind of character was not annoying, because joining forces with such a person meant that they would not suffer too much. Thinking back, that earth-shattering figure was also like this. How was there a trace of righteousness? But he was trustworthy. He was worth following. That was the most important thing. The universe was changing. The strong would rise, and the weak would fall. What was needed was ambitious and ruthless, not tragic heroes. He was very clear about this. Chapter 1668. In an ordinary waterside pavilion, several benevolent, sailing young gods faced each other in silence. This was a late discussion. Because they were looking for fragments, it took several years for the great cultivators to gradually return. After tens of thousands of years, benevolent sailing had moved from the tail of the anchor to the claw position. This was a great thing, but there was no joy in the eyes of the benevolent sailing young gods, as if it was an ordinary change. It was not that benevolent sailing young gods could keep their composure, but in the cultivation world, more than 300 years was far from enough. In the mortal world, there was a saying that it took 10 years for a tree to grow and 100 years for a person to grow. But in the cultivation world, this age had to be increased to at least 1,000 years. Only by not falling out of the anchor claw or arm for 1,000 years could the reserve of benevolent sailing young gods show a phenomenon of a blowout. This was an accident. The next time they returned to the right track, it would probably be the day they returned to the tail of the anchor. More than 300 years, they could barely cultivate some Jindan. Even Yuanying felt that it was not enough time, let alone Jinjuan. 90% of the Jinjuan who went up in the anchor chain sequencing this time would still be them in the next sequencing. At that time, without the collective collapse of the great Tao fragments, what could they use to create an accident? Of course, they would return to where they came from. There was no need to think too much about it. It was inevitable. Therefore, they actually had nothing to be happy about. This was not the true strength of benevolent sailing young gods. It was just a flash in the pan. One of the young gods blamed himself and said, "I was the one who introduced the Hengi boundary to everyone. During this period, I have been communicating with them, so I can't blame myself for everything that happened." In one battle, most of them were destroyed, and they became the joke of the anchor chain. A young god senior brother comforted him. "Junior brother, why do you blame yourself? It was just an accident. Moreover, we have also been in contact with the Hengi boundary. This is a joint decision of everyone. You don't have to bear it yourself. This is not something that one person can bear. When the Hengi boundary is defeated, we immediately abandon our friends. Won't this attract the attention of the forces of other realms? Do you think that C.I. Hang is a short-sighted force that only looks at immediate benefits?" Everyone agreed. This was also a common understanding in the cultivation world. Although they still had to choose a more powerful force to ally with in the end, this was a test of their skills. They needed to maintain their reputation. If they did it too hastily, it would be easy to be slandered by others. They would be seen as unreliable and passive. Therefore, under normal circumstances, even if they felt remorseful, they would still persevere for a period of time and then find another reason to avoid the limelight this time. This was the safest way for a cultivation force. The self-blaming Yang spirit sighed and said, "I've always been close to Senior Marshal Brother Li of Hung River, so I've always kept his purpose of coming to the anchor chain a secret. But now that everything has changed, I can't say anything. I hope all of you are mentally prepared." The young spirits of CI Hang began to take it seriously. Everyone had their own circle and their own secrets, especially young spirits like them. Of course, they were qualified to have their own secrets and did not need to report everything to the sect. However, if a young spirit took the initiative to say it, It must be because he thought that it was likely to affect the sect, so it was not a trivial matter. The Yang spirit sighed and said, Senior Marshal Brotherly didn't come to the anchor chain just because he happened to pass by here. He also wanted to see the situation of the anchor chain. He actually came to the anchor chain for a purpose. The purpose was that a 5-ring Xianyuan swordsman with an Yin spirit cultivation base had some conflicts with the cultivators of Hung River when he passed by. He killed 7 or 8 Jinjuan of Hung River, including a Yang spirit. Everyone was stunned when they heard this. Only a swordsman could do such a thing. A Yin spirit killing a Yang spirit. This was going against the heavens. Senior Marshal Brother Li judged that the swordsman would pass by the anchor chain. Because he couldn't find him in the void, he came to the anchor chain early to wait for him. He waited for nearly 100 years. He finally found his trace on the miniature star map sequencing. A Yang spirit of CI Hang reacted and said, Do you mean that he was hiding in the sequencing team of Zhaixing? And the swordsman was the one who destroyed the team? That's right. Senior Marshal Brother Li's judgment can't be wrong. After the sequencing was over, he chased after him. I didn't want to cause trouble for the sect, so I took the initiative to avoid him and went far away to try my luck with the fragments. The leading Yang spirit gasped. Shitty, have you ever asked about the background of the Xianyuan swordsman? The Yang spirit shook his head and said, I'm not stupid. Why would I ask about that? There's no reason to get into trouble again. But even if I didn't ask, I know who he is. He came from the direction of Zhou Xian, Yin spirit, and was able to kill the Yang spirit of Hung He. Senior Marshal Brothers, after hearing what I said, you can probably guess most of it. The leading Senior Marshal Brother's expression changed, and he said, You mean that Senior Marshal Brotherly of Hung, he killed the Xianyuan swordsman? So in order to prevent Xianyuan from coming to take revenge, he has to draw a clear line with Hung, He, and get rid of the implication? This is really, if you say so, I think we have to settle things with the people of Hung He as soon as possible. Those swordsmen are unreasonable. Who knows what methods they will use to take revenge? The Yang spirit was very confused. Senior Marshal Brother, I didn't say that Senior Marshal Brother Li killed the Xianyuan swordsman. The leading Senior Marshal Brother let out a long breath and said impatiently, You're hemming and hawing when you say something. You can't even explain it clearly after a long time. What exactly happened that made you make such a fuss? This time, the Yang spirit finally finished his words. I didn't see it with my own eyes, but because I was familiar with Senior Marshal Brother Li and for his safety on the anchor chain, I told him that I left a signal source in his body. The main reason was that I was afraid that if he did something, C.I. Hang would be the first to react. But when I was looking for fragments in the void, I suddenly found that the signal source had disappeared and it had lost its response. I was also afraid that he would run away after doing something big and leave C.I. Hang here as a scapegoat. So I rushed to the place where the signal source disappeared. When I arrived at the scene of the incident, I carefully examined it. In the end, it turned out that Senior Marshal Brother Li was killed by someone. That's why I immediately rushed back. Today, I invited all Senior Marshal Brothers to gather here and see what kind of rules we can come up with. Another Yang spirit was killed. The people of C.I. Hang were a little confused. Combined with this person's previous legendary achievements, it seemed that this person's killing of the Yang spirit was no longer a matter of luck, nor was it a matter of taking advantage of the situation. It was because he had such an ability. The problem seemed to be complicated. So, was he still connected to the Hengyi sector? Or was he drawing a line? Or was he pretending not to know and playing dumb? This was a test of the collective wisdom of a force. They were still connected. This 5-ring Xianyuan swordsman was really a little scary. The key was that he was obviously still connected to the most powerful Zhaixing of the anchor chain. This seemed to set the tone for the overall direction of the anchor chain in the future. If they still clung to the Hengyi sector and refused to let go, their future would not be easy. Leave the Hengyi sector aside? Wouldn't the people of the Hengyi sector come for revenge? They were really in a dilemma. Chapter 1669. Lu Xiaoyi's time of happiness didn't last for long. There was a mission from the Heaven Eyes. It was simple and clear. Jinxiu heaven and earth, eliminate evil and defend the Tao. There were other specific arrangements, so there was no need to go into detail. His boots finally landed on the ground, but Lu Xiaoyi's mood was not calm. After more than 1,000 years of cultivation, he had a deep understanding of this world of cultivation. He was very clear about the way to survive in the world of cultivation. Moreover, he was very understanding of human relationships and knew the details. He could also learn something from this task. He was no longer a greenhorn who didn't know anything. He wouldn't think that everything was fine just because he didn't do anything wrong. Doing things his own way was a sign of immaturity. How could he stay out of this chaotic situation? No matter what he did wrong, he had killed 2 of his colleagues since joining the Heaven Eyes. If he was in charge of the Heaven Eyes, he would definitely teach such a naughty, personal lesson. This had nothing to do with whether you did something wrong or not, because if the matter wasn't dealt with, it would have an impact on the system. When it came to the normal operation of the system and personal gains and losses, the higher-ups had to prioritize the former. That was why the appearance of this mission was strange. It didn't express the dissatisfaction of the higher-ups of the Heaven Eyes toward him at all, as if it was just an ordinary mission. The more it was like this, the more cautious he had to be. He had to be on guard against any traps. This was a problem that could only be solved by him alone. His background couldn't help him, and he couldn't drag his friends down with him. The Jinxiu heaven and earth was 30 years away from the anchor chain, which was where the Bayou came from. This was another reason for his suspicions. He wanted to go there to see the mysterious sword vein behind the Bayou, but he didn't put it on the itinerary. Now that he had fallen asleep, someone handed him a pillow. Wasn't this too much of a coincidence? He quietly left the realm and didn't say anything to anyone. This was the benefit of not joining the mission. He was free to come and go. He followed the star map and set a direction before turning into a ray of light. At the same time, news came from the inner realm to a meteor outside. There were dozens of cultivators gathered here. They were all at the perfected Lord level, and none of them were weak. When Dasami received the message, his expression was solemn as he mobilized. Everyone, this person has already left the domain, and his direction has been set. It's time for us to settle our grudges. I'll say it again. This person is extremely strong and cannot be defeated alone. We need a 3-man team to intercept him and maintain contact with each other so that we can provide support at any time. Some cultivators were somewhat worried. Will the anchor chain cultivator intervene? After all, doing so may affect the order of the various diplomatic missions. Dasami snorted coldly. He's not a member of the envoy group. He came with his face covered. Do we need to treat him like an envoy? The cultivators here basically came from 2 sides. One was the people of Hengi River, and the other was the loose cultivators that the Buddhist sect of the main world had found to support the 3 caves. They were all forces that had suffered a great loss in the miniature scene. They had gathered here for a long time, waiting for the opportunity to walk out of the Qi layer. Swordsman was not the only person who would seek revenge for the smallest grievance. The people of Hengi River were also like this. Those loose cultivators were not people who could endure suffering losses. Roaming the void of the universe had created their wild temperament. Their characteristic was that they would seek revenge for any grievances. They would not care who the other party was or what kind of extraordinary background they had. Dozens of people divided into dozens of small teams and formed a huge net, encircling the person in the direction he was heading. The void hunt had officially begun. In the outer regions of the star-plucking domain, such a commotion could not be hidden from the host. Star-plucking cultivators had already sent word of the abnormality in the outer space back to the sect. When Heqian was on duty, he hastily rushed into Senior Brother Broken Silkworm's quiet room. Outside the room, he kowtowed and asked, "Demons and monsters, ghosts and monsters in the outer space. If one is not surprised, they will be defeated. Heqian, what do you think of this?" Broken Silkworm remained calm and collected. Heqian carefully said, "It's very clear that these ghosts and monsters are targeting Senior Brother Liu. They want to encircle and hunt him. Senior brother Lu's strength is exceptional. If there were only a few people, there would be nothing to worry about. However, with dozens of cultivators coming in a group, since this is our anchor chain domain, is this kind of behavior allowed? Wouldn't that set a bad precedent? The relationship between our star plucking domain and the fifth ring domain has just been established. At this critical moment, it's not good for us to feign ignorance and watch helplessly, right? Broken Silkworm asked, what do you think we should do? Hachien gritted his teeth. Activate the power of the star plucking domain and sweep them away. That way, some people will know their place. The anchor chain domain has been too lenient on them in recent years. Some of these people from outside the domain are a bit ungrateful. Broken Silkworm shook his head. Too careless. Moreover, what makes you think that fellow Taoist Lu can't deal with these ghosts and monsters by himself? Seeing that Hachien still did not understand, he might as well explain it more thoroughly. The existence of these people has long been under fellow Taoist Lu's attention. However, due to the fact that they are too close to the star plucking domain and they have not expressed their true intentions, it's hard for them to make a move. Just like this time, when he goes out into the universe, he can bring these people out. The universe is vast and boundless. Playing hide-and-seek with a powerful swordsman in the void, I'm afraid that even if they have the guts to go, they won't be able to return alive. Hachien laughed dryly. Senior brother is quite confident in him. Broken Silkworm was afraid that he would act on his own, so he no longer hid it from him. The young god came to Hung, and hid in Ci Hang. After the sequencing ended, this young god of Hung, he wanted to take advantage of the chaos to make a move, but in the end, he got himself involved. Why bother? With such ability and advancing to the essence soul stage, why are you worried about him? What you're worried about now is this old young gods. Maybe we'll go against him in that matter, and our lives will be in danger. Hachien did not know about this and was a little stunned when he heard this. Broken Silkworm instructed, you have a good personal relationship with this person. The sect is very willing for you to make such capable friends, so I don't blame you for being worried. However, if you want to go out and help, your current strength can only be a burden. Hachien, you should put more effort into your own cultivation. Friends are friends, but if you can't keep up with others' footsteps, the gap will only widen. I don't know what others think, but don't you feel ashamed and uncomfortable? Hachien left, and the quiet room returned to peace. However, Broken Silkworm's heart was not as calm as it seemed on the surface. He had communicated with Lu Xiaoyi about how to deal with the group of people in outer space, but this was not the plan. He should have left them alone for a while to see how many people would join in. However, Lu Xiaoyi's departure this time came without any warning. It was very sudden. He did not even say goodbye or anything. This made Broken Silkworm a little dissatisfied. Young people were like this. Just because they had some achievements, they did not take their seniors seriously. They always thought that they could solve everything with what they had learned. Swordsmen were all like this. Pride was their biggest weakness. Looking at a certain direction in the sky, he was also very curious. Where did he go to cause trouble? You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.